The Barren Queen's Gamble. When a discarded wife becomes an unbreakable ruler. 7 years. 7 years of walking down cold stone corridors to a husband's locked door. 7 years of whispers branding her worthless. Tonight, Queen Alara Voss stands at the edge of a decision that could destroy her or set her free. A foreign lord offers forbidden salvation. The court mocks her existence. And King Ronan Hale, the man who's kept her at arm's length since their wedding night, is about to shatter every rule he's built between them. What happens next will rewrite a kingdom's fate. Stay until the end, drop a comment with your city, and hit that like button. This story gets wild. The seventh winter arrived like all the others, brutal, unforgiving, and indifferent to the suffering of queens. Alara Voss stood at the frost-covered window of her chambers, watching the first snowfall blanket the northern keep. The flakes fell thick and silent, muffling the world outside until all she could hear was her own breathing and the crackle of dying embers in the fireplace behind her. She pressed one palm against the glass. Cold bit through her skin immediately. 7 years. 7 years since she'd arrived at this fortress as a bride, draped in ceremonial silks that had cost more than most families earned in a lifetime. 7 years since she'd stood before the kingdom's lords and ladies, repeating vows that had meant everything to her, and apparently nothing to him. 7 years of waiting for a marriage that had never truly begun. The knock came at her door just after sunset. "Your Majesty." Marta's voice carried the practiced neutrality of a woman who'd served in royal households long enough to know when to show no emotion. "The king requests your presence." Lara didn't turn from the window. "When?" "Within the hour, ma'am." "Tell him I'll come." The door clicked shut. Alara closed her eyes and tried to steady the familiar twist in her stomach, that toxic mixture of hope and dread that arrived every single month like clockwork. She'd stopped counting how many times she'd made this walk. The number didn't matter. What mattered was that each time, some foolish part of her believed this time would be different. It never was. She dressed carefully, choosing a gown of deep emerald that brought out the color of her eyes. Stupid, maybe. Vain, definitely. But after 7 years of being invisible in her own marriage, she'd take any scrap of acknowledgement she could get. She left her hair down the way she'd worn it on their wedding night, dark waves falling past her shoulders. Another small rebellion. Another pointless gesture. The walk to Ronan's chambers took her through the oldest part of the keep, where stone walls bore the scars of centuries, and torchlight threw dancing shadows across ancient tapestries depicting battles she'd never heard of. Guards stood at attention as she passed, their faces carefully blank. They knew. Everyone knew. The whole damn kingdom knew that their queen walked this path once a month and returned alone, untouched, unchanged, barren. The word followed her like a curse. She heard it in the whispers that died when she entered rooms, saw it in the pitying glances from younger women who'd already borne multiple children. Felt it in the contemptuous silence from the court physicians who'd examined her repeatedly and found nothing wrong, which only made the situation worse, because if she wasn't the problem, then the fault lay with the king's rejection, and that was a truth too dangerous to speak aloud. She reached his door and paused, hand raised to knock. Behind the heavy oak, she could hear nothing. No movement, no voice, no sign of life. For one wild moment, she considered turning around and walking away. Just leaving, going back to her chambers and pretending the summons had never come. But she'd tried that once, 2 years ago. He'd sent his personal guard to retrieve her. The humiliation had been worse than anything. She knocked. "Come." His voice carried through the door, low, controlled, giving away nothing. Alara pushed it open and stepped inside. Ronan Hale stood by the window of his own chambers, a mirror image of her earlier position. He didn't turn when she entered, didn't acknowledge her presence at all, though he'd been the one to summon her. He was still dressed for court in black and silver, the formal attire of the Northern King, though he'd removed the crown and set it on his desk like an afterthought. He was, objectively, a striking man. Tall and broad-shouldered, built like the warrior he'd been before inheritance and politics had pinned him to a throne. Dark hair touched with premature silver at the temples. A face that might have been handsome if it ever showed anything resembling warmth. 7 years of marriage, and she'd seen him smile perhaps 3 times, never at her. You sent for me, Alara said when the silence stretched too long. I did. He turned finally, those pale gray eyes sliding over her without interest. The council has been asking questions again. Of course they had. The council asked questions every season, growing bolder each time. Questions about heirs and succession, about the strength of bloodlines and the future of the realm. Questions that all circled back to the same fundamental problem. Their queen was worthless. What did you tell them? She kept her voice level. The same thing I always tell them, that it's none of their concern. But it is their concern, isn't it? The words slipped out sharper than intended. The kingdom needs an heir. The council needs security. And I need... She stopped herself. Ronan's expression didn't change. What do you need, Alara? You, she thought. I need you to look at me like I'm not a mistake you regret. I need you to want this marriage as much as I did when we started. I need you to touch me just once without it being a political obligation performed in absolute silence. Nothing, she said instead. I need nothing. Something flickered in his eyes, there and gone so fast she might have imagined it. He crossed to the table where a crystal decanter sat among scattered papers and maps, poured himself a measure of amber liquid, and drank it in one swallow, poured another. The gathering is in 3 days, he said. The lords from the southern provinces are coming, bringing their families. I'm aware. There will be dancing, entertainment, the usual performances. Yes, you should prepare, wear something appropriate. Alara felt something crack inside her chest, a small sound like ice breaking. Appropriate, she repeated. Of course. Wouldn't want to embarrass the kingdom by looking like the failure I am. That's not what I... He stopped, jaw tightening, set the glass down with deliberate care. Alara, don't. She turned toward the door. Don't say my name like that, like you're trying to be kind. We both know this is what it is. You summon me here once a month because the court expects it. I come because I have no choice. And then we both go back to pretending this marriage exists. You do have a choice? She laughed, a bitter, broken sound. Do I? Tell me, Your Majesty, what exactly are my choices? I can't leave. I can't petition for annulment without destroying both our reputations. I can't even have a conversation with another man without starting rumors that could get him executed. So please, enlighten me. What choices do I have? Ronan moved then, closing the distance between them in 3 long strides. Alara's back hit the door. He didn't touch her, never touched her, but he stood close enough that she could smell wood smoke and leather and something darker underneath. His hands pressed flat against the wood on either side of her head, caging her in. You could leave, he said quietly. I've never stopped you from leaving. To go where? Back to my father's house in disgrace? To some remote estate where I can live out my days as a cautionary tale? She met his eyes, refusing to look away, even though her heart was hammering. This is my home now, whether you like it or not, whether you want me here or not. For a long moment, he just stared at her. Those gray eyes searched her face like he was looking for something specific and couldn't find it. Then he stepped back abruptly, putting distance between them again. 3 days, he said. Be ready. Alara didn't wait to be dismissed. She yanked open the door and walked out, spine straight, head high. Even though her hands were shaking and her eyes were burning with tears, she refused to shed where anyone could see them. She made it back to her chambers before she broke. The gathering arrived with all the pageantry and barely concealed hostility that characterized northern court politics. Alara stood in the great hall watching nobles file in, each house represented by their finest members dressed in their most expensive clothes. The southern lords came with their wives and daughters, parading them like merchandise at market. Lord Castellan brought his 3rd wife, young enough to be his granddaughter, already visibly pregnant. Lady Weston arrived with her 4 sons, each one a golden-haired reminder of her fertility. Even old Lord Harrow managed to produce a new grandchild to show off, his daughter's 5th. The message was clear. Everyone here could do the one thing their queen could not. Marta had dressed her in silver and white, a gown that probably cost more than some of these lords' annual tributes. It was beautiful. It was flawless. It made Alara feel like a decorated corpse at her own funeral. Smile, Your Majesty, Marta whispered as she made final adjustments. They'll be watching. They're always watching. Then don't give them anything to see. Sound advice. Alara painted on the expression she'd perfected over 7 years, serene, pleasant, utterly empty. The face of a woman who'd learned that showing emotion only gave your enemies ammunition. Ronan was already in the hall when she entered, surrounded by southern lords vying for his attention. He wore black again, always black, with silver thread worked through the fabric in patterns that caught the light. He looked like a king, powerful, untouchable, born to rule. When he saw her, he nodded once, a gesture so minimal it barely qualified as acknowledgement. She took her place beside his empty throne and waited. The evening crawled forward with excruciating slowness. Course after course of rich food she couldn't taste. Toast after toast to the king's health, the kingdom's prosperity, the strength of noble houses. Not one mention of the queen. She'd become so accustomed to being overlooked that it barely registered anymore. Until Lord Brennan stood. He was new to court, recently elevated after his father's death. Young, ambitious, and apparently lacking the political instinct to know when to keep his mouth shut. "A toast," he called out, voice cutting through the buzz of conversation, "to the king's health and the queen's future endeavors." The hall fell silent. Several lords looked like they wanted to crawl under the table. Lady Weston covered her mouth, eyes wide. Even Ronan went still, his hand frozen halfway to his wine glass. Alara felt blood drain from her face. Future endeavors. Such careful words, such a polite way to say, maybe you'll manage to produce an heir someday, though we all know you haven't managed it yet. "Lord Brennan," someone hissed, probably trying to save the fool from himself. But Brennan wasn't finished. He was drunk, Alara realized. Drunk and stupid, and about to make everything worse. "After all," he continued, raising his glass higher, 7 years is quite long enough to wait for results. Perhaps Her Majesty needs assistance? I'm sure many here would volunteer to help secure the line of succession if the king finds himself unable. The silence that followed was absolute. Alara couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The words hung in the air like poison gas, choking everyone in range. She was aware of eyes turning toward her, waiting to see how she'd react, waiting to see her break. She stood slowly, setting down her untouched wine glass with a hand that trembled only slightly. "Lord Brennan," she said, and was distantly proud that her voice came out steady. "Your concern for the kingdom's future is noted. However, I must decline your generous offer of assistance. I'm quite capable of fulfilling my duties without requiring volunteers. But, Your Majesty, I believe," Ronan's voice cut through whatever idiocy Brennan was about to spew, "that you've said enough." The king stood. The entire hall seemed to hold its breath. "In fact," Ronan continued, his tone absolutely flat, "I believe you've overstayed your welcome entirely. Guards." 2 men in the king's colors materialized at Brennan's sides. "You're removing me from the gathering?" Brennan sputtered, suddenly looking much more sober. "Your Majesty, I meant no disrespect. You meant exactly what you said. And now you'll leave, immediately." "But the Queen?" "The Queen," Ronan said, each word dropping like a stone into still water, "is none of your concern. She will never be your concern. If I hear her name from your mouth again, you'll find yourself removed from more than just this gathering. Am I clear?" Brennan went pale. He looked around the room, clearly hoping someone would intervene on his behalf. No one moved, no one spoke. Finally, he bowed stiffly and allowed the guards to escort him out. The moment he was gone, conversation resumed. Carefully at first, then building to normal volume as people desperately tried to pretend nothing had happened. Alara remained standing. She couldn't sit back down, couldn't stay in this hall another second surrounded by people who'd just watched her humiliation and done nothing. Without a word, she turned and walked toward the side exit. "Alara." She didn't stop, didn't turn around, just kept walking until she reached the gardens where cold air hit her face and she could finally breathe again. The night sky stretched above her, cloudless and full of stars that didn't care about queens or kingdoms or the crushing weight of public failure. She wrapped her arms around herself and tried to stop shaking. "Your Majesty." She spun. A man stood in the archway, not Ronan, Foreign clothing, expensive fabric, a face she recognized from earlier in the evening. One of the envoys from the eastern provinces. Lord something. She couldn't remember. Forgive the intrusion, he said, moving closer. I wanted to ensure you were well. I'm fine. With respect, you don't appear fine. He smiled, not unkindly. That was an ugly scene. Brennan is a fool. Yes, but he wasn't entirely wrong. Alara stiffened. Excuse me? The envoy raised his hands in a placating gesture. I'm not trying to insult you, Your Majesty. I'm trying to help. The situation you're in, it's untenable. The court grows bolder. The questions won't stop. And the king, he paused delicately. The king shows no signs of addressing the problem. There is no problem. Isn't there? He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You're a beautiful woman trapped in a marriage that exists in name only. The kingdom needs an heir. You need security. These are facts, not insults. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting there are solutions. Discrete solutions. He produced a small vial from inside his coat. This is from the eastern provinces. Very rare, very effective. One dose and nature takes its course. No one would question the timing. You'd have your heir. The kingdom would have stability, and no one would be the wiser. Alara stared at the vial, at the clear liquid inside that promised everything she'd wanted for 7 years. An heir, purpose, proof that she wasn't the failure everyone believed her to be. All she had to do was betray her husband, lie to the kingdom, build her entire future on a foundation of deceit. Her voice caught. That's impossible. I couldn't. Why not? Because of love? The envoy laughed softly. Your Majesty, forgive me, but the king doesn't love you. He barely acknowledges you exist. Why sacrifice your future for a man who's already abandoned you? He hasn't abandoned me. Hasn't he? 7 years, Your Majesty. 7 years of separate chambers, separate lives, separate everything. That's not a marriage. That's a prison sentence. Alara's hand moved toward the vial before she could stop herself. Her fingers touched the cold glass. Just think about it, the envoy murmured. You don't have to decide tonight, but the offer stands. When you're ready, she won't be ready. They both whirled. Ronan stood in the archway, and Alara had never seen that expression on his face before. Rage. Pure, undiluted, terrifying rage barely held in check. Your Majesty, the envoy began, I was merely offering my wife away to commit treason. Ronan moved forward, and the envoy stumbled backward. Suggesting she betray her crown and her vows for a bastard heir that would tear this kingdom apart? I meant no offense. Get out. The envoy didn't argue. He pocketed the vial and fled. Silence crashed down. Alara stood frozen, unable to look at Ronan, unable to explain what he'd just witnessed. She'd been considering it. For one horrible moment, she'd actually been considering it. Did you want it? Ronan's voice was quiet now. Dangerous. What? The vial. Did you want it? I don't know. She wrapped her arms around herself. Does it matter? Yes. He crossed to her in 2 strides, caught her chin, and forced her to meet his eyes. It matters, Alara. It matters if you were ready to... He stopped, jaw working. Do you really think so little of yourself that you'd take that risk? Think little of myself? She jerked away from his grip. You're the one who thinks nothing of me. 7 years, Ronan. 7 years of marriage, and we've never... Her voice broke. Everyone believes I'm barren because you won't touch me. The whole kingdom thinks I'm broken because you can't stand to be in the same room with me for more than 5 minutes. So, yes, when someone offers me a solution, I consider it because I'm desperate and alone and so tired of being nothing. You're not nothing. Then what am I? She was shouting now, past caring who might hear. What am I to you if not nothing? A political obligation? A mistake you're stuck with? Tell me, because I've spent 7 years trying to figure it out, and I can't. He stopped, started again. You're something I can't have. Alara froze. What? You heard me. No, I didn't, because that makes no sense. I'm your wife, Ronan. How can I be something you can't have when I'm literally bound to you by law and vow and it's complicated? Then uncomplicate it. Explain it to me. Give me something, anything that makes this make sense because I'm losing my mind and I can't. Her voice cracked completely. I can't keep doing this. I can't keep waiting for something that's never going to happen. Ronan stared at her. For a long moment, she thought he might actually answer, might actually give her the explanation she'd been begging for since their wedding night. Then his expression shuddered, going cold and distant again. Go inside, he said. It's freezing out here. Ronan, go. Inside. Alara felt something break. Not crack this time, fully break. 7 years of hoping, trying, waiting, and it all came down to this. Him telling her to go inside like she was a child being sent to bed. Fine, she whispered. Fine. I'll go inside. I'll play the perfect queen at your gathering. I'll smile and pretend and be exactly what everyone expects. But after this? She stepped closer, making sure he heard every word. After this, I'm done. Done waiting, done hoping, done destroying myself for a man who can't even look at me without flinching. She turned and walked back toward the hall, leaving him standing alone in the garden. She didn't see his hands clench into fists, didn't see him lean against the stone wall like his legs might give out, didn't hear the word he whispered into the darkness after she was gone. Alara? It sounded like grief. Dit. The rest of the gathering passed in a blur of forced smiles and empty conversations. Alara danced when required, spoke when addressed, and felt absolutely nothing. She'd gone numb somewhere between the garden and the great hall, and it was almost a relief. If she couldn't feel, she couldn't hurt. She was mid-conversation with Lady Weston, enduring yet another detailed description of childbirth, when the music changed, a slower tempo. Couples began pairing off for the traditional formal dance. Ronan appeared at her elbow. "My lady," he said formally, extending his hand. Every eye in the room turned toward them. This was expected, required even. The king and queen always danced together during the formal set. It was tradition. Alara placed her hand in his, feeling nothing. They moved to the center of the floor. The music began. He pulled her into position, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers. They'd done this before, at countless gatherings over 7 years. They knew the steps by heart. "You're angry," he said quietly as they began to move. "I'm nothing," she replied. "Remember?" Alara said, "Don't. Please don't." She kept her eyes fixed over his shoulder. "Let's just get through this." They turned, separated, came back together. His hand tightened fractionally on her waist. "What you said in the garden," he began. "I meant it." "I know. That's the problem." She finally looked at him. "What is your problem, Ronan? Truly? Because I've tried everything. I've been patient. I've been understanding. I've given you every possible chance to explain, and you never do. So what is it? What did I do that was so terrible you can't bear to... You didn't do anything." His voice was rough. "This was never about you being inadequate. It was about me being..." He stopped as another couple swirled past. "This isn't the place." "Then where? When? Give me a time and place and I swear I'll be there. Just stop avoiding me." He was quiet for a long moment, just guiding them through the steps. Then, "My chambers, after the gathering ends. Why should I believe this time will be different?" "Because," he said, and something in his eyes made her breath catch, "I'm running out of ways to keep you at a distance. And if you come to my chambers tonight, I don't know if I'll be able to..." He stopped himself. "Just come, please." The song ended. They separated to polite applause. Ronan bowed correctly and walked away, leaving Alara standing in the middle of the dance floor trying to understand what had just happened. She barely noticed when another man stepped up to claim the next dance. Barely heard the music start again. Her mind was spinning, replaying Ronan's words, trying to decipher what he'd meant. "I'm running out of ways to keep you at a distance." Why would he need to keep her at a distance? Why would he want to? The gathering finally, mercifully, ended near midnight. Alara went through the motions of saying goodbyes, accepting compliments on her gown, pretending she hadn't noticed the whispered conversations that stopped when she walked past. The moment the last noble had been escorted to their guest quarters, she fled, But she didn't go to her chambers, she went to his. The walk felt different this time. Not hopeful, she'd buried hope hours ago, but purposeful. Whatever happened tonight, whatever he told her or didn't tell her, at least she'd finally know. She raised her hand to knock, then paused. Through the door she could hear movement, glass breaking, something heavy hitting a wall. She pushed the door open without knocking. Ronan stood in the center of his chambers, breathing hard. A chair was overturned. The crystal decanter lay shattered on the floor, amber liquid spreading across stone. He looked up when she entered, and the expression on his face made her stop. "I told you to come after the gathering," he said. His voice was strange, strained. "The gathering ended. I'm here." "You shouldn't be. You asked me to come." "I know, He ran a hand through his hair, disheveling it. "This is a mistake." Alara closed the door behind her. "Then make it. I don't care anymore. 7 years, Ronan. 7 years of dancing around whatever this is. I deserve the truth." "You deserve better than the truth." "Let me decide that." He laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "You really want to know? Fine, I'll tell you." He crossed to the window, putting his back to her. "There's a pact, an old one, older than this kingdom, made by my great-grandfather when he first claimed these lands. The details don't matter, but the result does. Every king of the North is bound by it. And one of the terms is that we cannot—" He stopped, shoulders rigid. "We cannot produce an heir through love." Alara felt the floor shift beneath her. "What?" "The moment a king of the North truly loves his queen, truly gives himself to that bond, it triggers consequences. The heir born from that union becomes forfeit, payment for the power that keeps this kingdom standing." That's... She struggled to process it. "That's insane. How can a child be payment for... I don't make the rules. I just live with them." He turned finally, and his eyes were red-rimmed. "So you see, Alara, it's not that I don't want you. It's not that you're inadequate or undesirable or any of the things this godforsaken court has made you believe. It's that the moment I touch you, the moment I let myself feel what I've been fighting for 7 years, I damn any child we create." The room spun. Alara grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. "You've known this the whole time? Since our wedding?" "Since before our wedding. The pact is explained to every heir. I knew what I was agreeing to when I accepted the crown." "Then why marry me at all? Why put me through this?" "Because I'm a selfish bastard who thought he could handle it." He laughed again, bitter. "I thought I could keep you at arm's length, make it a political arrangement and nothing more. Keep my distance, and everything would be fine. But you made that impossible." He crossed to her slowly, each step deliberate. "Every time you smiled at me, even though I gave you nothing. Every time you showed kindness to servants and compassion to petitioners and strength in front of the court. Every time you walked down that hallway once a month with hope still in your eyes." He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could feel his breath. "You made it impossible not to love you." Alara's heart stopped. "What?" "I love you," he said, and it sounded like a confession, like a surrender. "I've loved you since the first year, maybe before. And it's killing me because every day that I keep you at a distance is another day I make you suffer, but every day I give in is another day I risk." She kissed him. It wasn't planned, wasn't thought through. 1 second she was standing there trying to process everything he'd just said, and the next her hands were fisted in his shirt, and her mouth was on his, and 7 years of longing poured out in a single desperate moment. For a heartbeat, he froze. Then something in him broke. He kissed her back with a hunger that stole her breath, hands coming up to cup her face like she was something precious and breakable and essential. 7 years of restraint shattered between them. He backed her against the wall, never breaking the kiss, and she made a sound she'd never heard herself make before, desperate and needy and absolutely shameless. "Alara," he breathed against her mouth. "We can't." "We can." She pulled him closer. "We will. I don't care about the pact or the consequences or... You should care. The child... We'll figure it out. We'll find a way. But I'm not spending another night alone when you..." She kissed him again, harder this time. "When you love me." He groaned, hands sliding down to her waist. "This is madness." "Then let's be mad. If we do this, there's no going back. The pact will know. It always knows." "Good. Let it know. Let everyone know. I don't care anymore." Something shifted in his eyes, the last thread of control snapping. You're sure? I've never been more sure of anything. He lifted her, and she wrapped her legs around his waist as he carried her toward the bed. They left a trail of discarded formal wear, silver gown, black coat, too many layers between them. When he finally laid her down and looked at her, really looked at her without walls or distance or restraint, she saw everything she'd been waiting 7 years to see. Desire, need, love. I'm sorry, he said roughly, bracing himself above her, for all of it, for making you wait, for making you doubt yourself. For every moment I made you feel like you weren't. She pulled him down to her. Show me now, that's all I want. He did. The night burned away between them, 7 years of denial breaking apart in heat and hunger, and something deeper that neither of them could name. When he finally entered her, Alara gasped not from pain but from the rightness of it, the way her body had known his even when they'd been strangers. He moved slowly at first, watching her face, learning what made her gasp and arch and dig her nails into his shoulders. Ronan, she breathed, and his name in her mouth seemed to undo something in him. He kissed her hard, moving faster now, and she met him stroke for stroke until they were both shaking and the world had narrowed to just this, skin on skin, breath mingling, two people finally becoming what they'd always been meant to be. When she came apart in his arms, she cried. Not from sadness, but from relief so profound it felt like being reborn. He followed seconds later, burying his face in her neck and saying her name like a prayer. They lay tangled together afterward, hearts still racing, neither wanting to move or speak or do anything that might break the spell. I love you, Alara whispered against his chest. I've loved you since the beginning, too. His arms tightened around her. I know, that's what made it impossible. What happens now? I don't know. He pressed a kiss to her hair. But whatever comes, we face it together. She nodded, already half asleep, feeling safe for the first time in 7 years. Neither of them saw the shadows in the corner of the room shift and writhe, responding to what had just been done. Neither of them felt the ancient power taking notice, marking what had occurred and tallying its price. The pact had been broken, and the debt would soon come due. Alara woke to pale sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the unfamiliar weight of someone else's arm across her waist. For a moment she didn't move, didn't breathe. Just lay there feeling Ronan's chest rise and fall against her back, his breath warm on her neck, and tried to convince herself this wasn't a dream she'd wake from, alone in her own cold bed. His hand flexed against her stomach, a small movement, but enough to tell her he was awake too. You're still here, he murmured. Did you think I'd leave? I hoped you wouldn't. He pressed a kiss to her shoulder. But I would have understood. She turned in his arms to face him. Morning light made his eyes look almost silver, softening the harsh lines of his face. He looked younger like this, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. No regrets? She asked. Only that I waited so long. His thumb traced her jawline. 7 years of torturing us both because I thought I was protecting you. Were you? Protecting me? His expression darkened. I don't know anymore. The pact is real, Alara. What we did last night... He stopped, jaw tightening. There will be consequences. Then we'll face them. You say that now, but when the bill comes due... She kissed him, cutting off whatever darkness he was about to spiral into. We'll face them, she repeated against his mouth. Together. You said so yourself. He pulled her closer, and for a while they didn't talk at all. The world outside could wait. The kingdom, the court, the ancient pact and its mysterious consequences. All of it could wait while they learned each other in the morning light, slower this time, memorizing details they'd been too desperate to notice in the dark. When they finally emerged from his chambers hours later, Alara felt like a different person, like she'd shed 7 years of shame and doubt and stepped into a new skin that actually fit. She knew she probably looked thoroughly debauched, wrinkled gown, hair tangled despite her attempts to fix it, but she couldn't bring herself to care. Marta took one look at her when she returned to her chambers and went still. Your Majesty, she said carefully, you look different? Happy. Marta's eyes were wide. You look happy. Alara laughed, actually laughed, bright and genuine. I am happy. Is that so shocking? After 7 years? Yes, ma'am. Very shocking. Marta moved to help her with the gown. Does this mean... It means things have changed. That's all I can say right now. But word spread anyway, the way it always did in a place like this. By evening, the whole court was buzzing with speculation. The queen had spent the night in the king's chambers. They'd been seen together at breakfast, actually talking, actually smiling. Lord Castellan's wife swore she'd seen them holding hands in the corridor. Lady Weston insisted she'd witnessed an actual kiss in the library. The rumors built like wildfire, and Alara ignored them all. Let them talk. Let them speculate. After 7 years of whispers about her inadequacy, they could damn well whisper about this instead. But not everyone was pleased with the development. Your Majesty, Lady Bronwyn cornered her 3 days later in the East Wing. The old woman had been a fixture at court since before Ronan's father died, self-appointed guardian of propriety and tradition. A word, if you please. Alara suppressed a sigh. Of course, Lady Bronwyn. I'll be direct. The court is concerned about recent changes in behavior. Are they? A queen must maintain dignity, Your Majesty. Appearances matter. And recently you've been rather, she sniffed delicately, indiscreet. Indiscreet, Alara repeated flatly. I've been spending time with my husband. That's indiscreet? The manner in which you've been spending time raises questions. A queen should be above such obvious displays of... Another sniff. Carnality. Alara felt heat rise in her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from anger. I see. So for 7 years, the court questioned my marriage because it wasn't consummated. Now the court has questions because it is? There's no winning with you people, is there? Your Majesty, no. I'm done apologizing for existing. Done walking on eggshells to please a court that's never been pleased with anything I do. If you have concerns, take them to the king. Otherwise, this conversation is over. She walked away before Bronwyn could respond, hands shaking slightly. Part of her couldn't believe she'd just done that. The old Alara would have apologized, smoothed things over, made herself smaller to avoid conflict. The new Alara, the one who'd finally stopped waiting for permission to exist, was done with that. She found Ronan in his study, buried in maps and correspondence. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but close. You look furious, he observed. Your court is insufferable. Tell me something I don't know. He set down his quill. What happened? She told him about Bronwyn, about the whispers and judgments and impossible standards. He listened without interrupting, but she saw his jaw tighten with each detail. I'll speak to her, he said when she finished. Don't. It won't help. Alara moved to the window, looking out over the courtyard. They'll never accept me, Ronan. I could bear 10 heirs and they'd still find something to criticize. Then stop trying to please them. She turned. That's your advice? Just ignore them? It's what I do. He stood, cross to her. The court will always have opinions. Always judge, always whisper. You can't control that, but you can control whether you let it touch you. Easy for you to say. You're the king. I'm just my wife, my queen, the woman I love. He cupped her face. That's not just anything. She wanted to believe him, wanted to sink into the certainty in his voice and let it shield her from everything else. But something cold was forming in her gut, a premonition she couldn't shake. What's wrong? Ronan asked, reading her face too easily now. I don't know. I just feel like something's coming. The pact? Maybe. Or maybe I'm just paranoid. She forced a smile. Ignore me. 7 years of anxiety doesn't disappear overnight. But the feeling didn't go away. It grew stronger over the next week, a constant hum of wrongness she couldn't explain or escape. She felt watched, followed, like shadows were paying attention in ways they shouldn't. Then the dreams started. Dark water rising. A child's cry cut off mid-sound. Ronan's face twisted in anguish, reaching for something she couldn't see. And underneath it all, a voice, ancient, patient, utterly inhuman, saying the same thing over and over. Debt, debt, debt. She woke gasping, Ronan already awake beside her trying to calm her. Another nightmare? He asked quietly. She'd had 3 in 5 nights. It's nothing. Alara, I said it's nothing. She pulled away from him, immediately regretting the harshness. I'm sorry. I can't talk about it. But she couldn't ignore it either. The dreams bled into her waking hours, glimpses of things that shouldn't be there, shadows moving wrong, whispers in empty rooms. Once, she could have sworn she saw something dark and formless watching from the corner of her chambers, but when she blinked, it was gone. She was losing her mind. Had to be. Because the alternative, that the pact was already acting, already claiming its price, was too terrible to consider. 2 weeks after that first night together, Alara missed her monthly cycle. She told herself it meant nothing. Stress could cause delays, anxiety, the sheer upheaval of her life changing so drastically. It didn't have to mean she was pregnant, except she knew her body, and she knew. Marta, she said quietly one morning, I need you to fetch the physician, discreetly. The examination confirmed what she already knew. 6 weeks, maybe 7. Healthy, as far as the physician could tell, though it was early yet. Congratulations, Your Majesty, the physician said warmly. The kingdom will be overjoyed. Alara thanked him mechanically and sent him away before the panic could fully hit. Pregnant, she was pregnant with Ronan's child, the one thing she'd wanted desperately for 7 years, and now all she could feel was terror, because the pact had been clear, according to Ronan. An heir born from love would be forfeit, payment for power. And she'd just created exactly that. She had to tell him, couldn't keep this secret, not when it affected them both. But when she went to find him, she discovered he'd left that morning for the border territories, some dispute between lords that required the king's personal attention. He'd be gone a week, maybe more. A week to sit with this knowledge alone. A week to feel the thing growing inside her, and know it was already marked for sacrifice. She made it 2 days before the court noticed something was wrong. Your Majesty looks pale, Lady Weston commented at dinner. Are you unwell? Just tired, Alara lied. But the scrutiny only increased. Nobles watched her with calculating eyes, noting when she barely touched her food, when she excused herself early, when she avoided certain smells that suddenly made her nauseous. They were waiting for confirmation, waiting to see if the Baron Queen had finally fulfilled her purpose. On the 3rd day, Lord Castellan approached her directly. Forgive my boldness, Your Majesty, but there are questions circulating, questions that require answers if we're to properly advise the king. What questions? She kept her voice level. Whether the recent developments in your marriage have borne fruit. The kingdom has a right to know if an heir is forthcoming. The kingdom will know when there's something to know. With respect, Your Majesty, that's not sufficient. If you are with child, preparations must be made. Announcements, security, proper care. I said the kingdom will know when I'm ready to tell them. Or is my word as queen suddenly insufficient? Castellan's eyes narrowed. Your word is law, of course. But secrecy breeds suspicion, and in your position, suspicion is dangerous. It was a threat, thinly veiled, but a threat nonetheless. Alara felt something cold settle in her chest. Noted, she said flatly. Now, if you'll excuse me. She fled to her chambers and locked the door, heart hammering. They knew, or suspected strongly enough that it made no difference. And if they knew, it was only a matter of time before pressure mounted, before the court demanded confirmation, before everything spiraled out of her control. She needed Ronan, needed his steadiness, his certainty, his promises that they'd face this together. But he was 3 days' ride away, dealing with territorial disputes while she drowned in a court that was closing in like a trap. That night, the dreams got worse. She was walking through the keep, but everything was wrong. Corridors stretched too long, walls breathed like living things, and that voice kept echoing, debt, debt, debt. She followed it down, down, down into places that shouldn't exist beneath the fortress, until she stood before something ancient and hungry that wore shadows like skin. The debt comes due, it said in a voice like grinding stone. The child or the king? Choose. She woke screaming. Marta rushed in, followed by 2 guards who'd heard the commotion. Your Majesty! Marta gripped her shoulders. You're safe, you're safe, it was just a dream. But it wasn't just a dream. Alara knew that with absolute certainty. The pact was reaching out, making its demands clear. The child or the king? Her baby's life or Ronan's? And she had no idea how to choose something like that, no framework for that kind of impossible decision. "I'm fine," she managed. "Just a nightmare. Please, leave me." They hesitated, but eventually obeyed. Alara sat in the dark afterward, hands pressed to her still flat stomach, and tried not to fall apart completely. Ronan returned 4 days later, and she'd never been so relieved to see anyone in her life. She met him in the courtyard before he'd even dismounted, throwing herself into his arms hard enough that he stumbled. "Alara? What's wrong?" "Inside. Not here." She pulled away, aware of watching eyes. "Please." He followed her to his chambers without question. The moment the door closed, she turned to face him. "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air. Ronan went absolutely still. "How long have you known?" "A week, maybe more. I wanted to tell you immediately, but you were gone and I—" Her voice cracked. "The dreams, Ronan. I keep having these dreams, and there's this voice saying the debt comes due, and I have to choose between the child or you, and I don't know what that means, but I'm terrified." He crossed to her in 2 strides, pulled her against his chest. "Breathe. Just breathe. I can't because I know what this means. The pact is already acting, already claiming what it's owed, and our baby will be fine," he said firmly. "We'll find a way." "How?" "You said yourself, the moment we created a child from love, it became forfeit. Those were your exact words." "I know what I said." He pulled back to look at her. "But I also said we'd face the consequences together." "I meant that, Alara. Whatever the pact demands, we'll fight it. And if we can't? If there's no fighting something that old, that powerful?" His jaw tightened. "Then I'll find another way to pay the debt." "What does that mean?" "It means I'm not letting anything happen to you or our child, no matter the cost." The certainty in his voice should have been comforting. Instead, it terrified her, because she recognized that tone, the same one he used when issuing commands he expected to be obeyed without question. He was already planning something, already calculating how to solve this problem, even if it destroyed him in the process. "Ronan, the court knows, don't they?" He changed the subject abruptly. "About the pregnancy. They suspect. Castellan was asking questions before you left." "Of course he was." Ronan moved to the window, tension radiating from every line of his body. "How long before they demand confirmation?" "Days, maybe hours." She wrapped her arms around herself. "They're circling like wolves. I can feel it." "Then we confirm it. Tonight. Make an official announcement before they can twist it into something political." "Are you sure?" "No, but secrecy isn't protecting us anymore." He turned back to her. "At least if it's public knowledge, the court will have to support you. Custom demands it." Alara wasn't so sure about that, but she was too exhausted to argue. "All right, we'll announce it tonight." The announcement was made at dinner, with the full court assembled. Ronan stood and called for silence, one hand resting on Alara's shoulder in a gesture of unity that wasn't lost on anyone present. "The queen is with child," he said simply, "an heir to the northern throne. The kingdom's future is secured." For a moment, absolute silence. Then someone started applauding, tentatively at first, then building as others joined in. Within seconds, the entire hall was on their feet, cheering and calling out congratulations. Alara smiled and accepted the well wishes, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was watching a performance. These same people had whispered about her barrenness for years, had mocked her, pitied her, questioned her worth. Now they celebrated because it benefited them, because an heir meant stability and continuation of power. Not one of them actually cared about her, except Ronan. She felt his hand tighten on her shoulder, anchoring her through the chaos. When she looked up at him, he was watching the crowd with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between satisfaction and grim determination. "You all right?" he murmured. "Ask me again in 9 months." The celebration lasted hours. Nobles approached one by one to offer congratulations and advice, most of it unwanted. Lady Weston went on at length about proper nutrition. Lord Harrow suggested she begin resting immediately. Lady Bronwyn, who'd barely spoken to her since their confrontation, presented her with a family heirloom meant to ensure safe delivery. It was overwhelming, suffocating. By the time the evening finally ended, Alara was ready to collapse. But sleep brought the dreams back, worse than before. This time, she was in a room made of darkness and old stone. The child, Her child, somehow grown enough to have features, lay on an altar made of something that looked like frozen lightning. The shadow thing from her previous dreams loomed over it, reaching down with appendages that weren't quite hands. "The debt," it said again. "Blood of love, freely given, or the one who loved first. Choose, Queen. Choose which sacrifice you offer." She tried to run, tried to grab her baby and flee, but her body wouldn't move. She was frozen, helpless, forced to watch as those shadow hands descended toward. She woke gasping, Ronan already sitting up beside her. "The same dream?" he asked quietly. She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Tell me." So she did. Described the altar, the shadow thing, the impossible choice it kept demanding. When she finished, Ronan's face had gone hard as stone. "It's giving you options," he said slowly. "The child or the one who loved first. That's me. It wants me." "No, Ronan, no. It makes sense. The pact was made by my ancestor, bound to my bloodline. Of course it would accept a Hail King as payment. We're not discussing this." Alara grabbed his arm. "You're not sacrificing yourself? We'll find another way." "What other way?" "You said it yourself. This thing is ancient and powerful. We can't fight it directly." "Then we leave. We take whatever resources we can carry and we run. Go somewhere the pact can't follow." "The pact is bound to this land, Alara. As long as I hold the crown, it can follow me anywhere, and if I abdicate—" He stopped, jaw working. "If I give up the throne, the pact might dissolve entirely. But it would also leave the North vulnerable, unprotected. Everything my family built would crumble. I don't care about the North. I care about you." "I know." He pulled her close. "But I care about both. And I'm not letting you raise our child in a kingdom torn apart by civil war because I was too coward to do what needed to be done." She wanted to scream, wanted to shake him until he understood that she couldn't lose him, not now, not after finally finding each other. But she also knew that expression, the one that said he'd already made his decision and nothing would change his mind. "There has to be another option," she said desperately. "Something we're not seeing." "Maybe. I've sent for the archives, everything we have on the original pact. If there's a loophole or alternative, I'll find it." "And if there isn't?" He didn't answer, just held her tighter while outside the window, shadows gathered like they were listening. The next weeks passed in a blur of mounting tension. Ronan spent every spare moment buried in ancient texts and crumbling documents, searching for any mention of the pact and its terms. Alara watched her body change, subtle shifts that meant life was growing inside her, and tried not to think about the price that life might demand. The court, meanwhile, grew stranger. Nobles who'd barely acknowledged her existence now hovered constantly, offering unwanted advice and thinly veiled threats disguised as concern. Castellan suggested she consider a move to the southern estates for her health. Bronwyn insisted she stop attending council meetings to avoid unnecessary stress. Weston recommended she appoint a regent to handle queenly duties until after the birth. They were trying to isolate her, remove her from power while she was vulnerable. And there was nothing she could do about it without looking paranoid or unstable. "They're positioning," Ronan said when she mentioned it. "Getting ready to make moves the moment the heir is born." "What kind of moves?" "The kind where I have an unfortunate accident and they raise our child as a puppet ruler." His voice was flat. "It's happened before in other kingdoms. Wouldn't be unprecedented." Alara felt ice slide down her spine. "You think they'd actually—" "I think they're ambitious, and the pregnancy has given them opportunities they didn't have before. Whether they'd act on those opportunities." He shrugged. "I'm not taking chances." He doubled her guard, assigned men he trusted personally to watch her chambers, stopped eating anything he hadn't seen prepared. The keep went from feeling like a home to feeling like a siege, and Alara was trapped in the center of it, her body no longer entirely her own. At 16 weeks, she felt the first flutter of movement. She was sitting in the library when it happened, a sensation like bubbles, like something small and alive reminding her it existed. Her hand went to her stomach automatically, and for just a moment everything else fell away. The pact, the court, the impossible choices looming in her future. None of it mattered compared to the tiny life making itself known. "I'm going to protect you," she whispered. "I don't know how, but I will. I promise." The baby fluttered again as if in answer. That night, she made a decision. She waited until Ronan was asleep, then slipped from bed and padded barefoot to his study. The archives he'd been researching were scattered across every surface. Leather-bound volumes, loose parchments, documents so old they crumbled at the edges. She started reading. Hours passed. Her eyes burned from candlelight and archaic script, but she kept going, driven by desperate hope that she'd find something he'd missed. Some detail or clause or forgotten amendment that would save them. She found it buried in a journal written by Ronan's great-great-grandmother, 3 generations back. The handwriting was nearly illegible, faded to almost nothing, but Alara read it 5 times to be sure she understood. The pact accepts substitution. Blood for blood, love for love. If one willing stands in place of the claimed, the debt transfers. But the substitute must choose freely, with full knowledge, and the choice cannot be undone. Alara sat back, heart hammering. A substitute. Someone else could take the debt, someone who chose it willingly. She knew immediately who that someone would have to be. Herself. The child or the king, the shadow thing had said. But what if there was a third option? What if she offered herself instead? Not as the one who loved first, but as the one who'd break every rule to protect what she loved? It was insane. Suicide, probably. She had no idea what taking the debt actually meant. Death, imprisonment, transformation into something no longer human. The journal gave no details. But if it meant her child and Ronan both survived, if it meant they'd have a future even without her in it, she could make that trade. She was still sitting there when dawn broke and Ronan found her. Alara. He took in the scattered documents, her wild expression. What are you doing? I found something. She handed him the journal, pointing to the relevant passage. He read it slowly, expression darkening with each word. When he looked up, his eyes were sharp. No. It's a solution. It's not a solution. It's you offering to die in our place. You don't know that it means death. It means losing you. That's the only thing that matters. He slammed the journal shut. Absolutely not. We're not discussing this. We have to discuss it. It's an option we didn't have before, an option that requires your life. That's not an option. That's a nightmare. He grabbed her shoulders. I'm not letting you sacrifice yourself. Not for me, not for the child, not for anything. That's not your choice to make. Like hell it isn't. You're my wife, the mother of my child, the only person in this godforsaken kingdom I give a damn about. I'm not losing you to some ancient curse because I was too selfish to— Stop it! She pulled away. Stop acting like you're the only one who gets to make impossible choices. This is my life, my body, my decision. Your decision affects all of us. Then maybe you should have thought of that before you broke the pact. She was screaming now, 7 years of repressed fury finally breaking free. You knew the consequences. You knew what we risked, and you did it anyway because you couldn't stand keeping me at a distance anymore. So don't you dare stand there and tell me I can't make the same choice for the same reasons. Silence crashed down. Ronan stared at her like she'd struck him. You're right, he said quietly. I'm a selfish bastard who damned us both because I was weak. But that's exactly why I can't let you do this. Because I know what it costs to choose love over duty, and I'm not letting you pay that price. Too late. Alara felt tears on her face but didn't wipe them away. I already paid it 7 years ago when I married you. When I waited and hoped and believed that someday you'd see me as something other than a political obligation. I chose this path, Ronan. Every day for 7 years I chose it, and I'm choosing it now. Alara, I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you what I'm going to do. When the time comes, when the pact demands its payment, I'm offering myself as substitute. And there's nothing you can say that will change my mind. She walked out before he could respond, leaving him standing alone in his study surrounded by documents that promised nothing but loss. She made it halfway to her chambers before the first pain hit. It felt like fire spreading through her abdomen, sharp and wrong and wrong. Alara gasped, grabbing the wall for support. Another wave followed immediately, stronger than the first, and she felt wetness between her legs. No, not now. Not when they were so close to— Guards! Her voice came out strangled. Get the physician, now! Everything after that blurred into a nightmare of pain and panic. Hands lifting her, carrying her somewhere. Marta's voice saying something she couldn't process. the physician's grim expression as he examined her while she bit back screams. "The baby," she managed, "is the baby—" "Too early to say, Your Majesty. You need to stay calm and let me work." She tried. Failed. Panic clawed at her throat because she knew what this was, knew with absolute certainty that the pact wasn't waiting for the birth to collect its debt. It was acting now, claiming what it was owed before they could find a way to stop it. "Ronan," she gasped. "I need Ronan." He was already there, she realized, kneeling beside the bed, gripping her hand hard enough to hurt. "I'm here. I'm right here." "It's happening," she whispered. "The pact, it's taking—" "No, it's not taking anything. You're going to be fine. The baby's going to be fine." But his voice was shaking, and she'd never heard Ronan Hale sound afraid before. The physician worked through the night. Alara drifted in and out of consciousness, caught between fever dreams and waking nightmares. She saw the shadow thing again hovering at the edge of her vision, patient and hungry. "The debt comes due," it whispered. "Choose, or I choose for you." "Take me," she tried to say. "Leave them alone and take me." But no sound came out. Her body was shutting down, choosing for her in the worst possible way. Somewhere around dawn, the pain stopped. Not gradually, just stopped all at once, like a switch being flipped. Alara gasped, suddenly able to breathe again. The physician made a startled sound. "Your Majesty, can you hear me?" She nodded weakly. "The bleeding has stopped. I don't—" He sounded baffled. "I don't understand. This should have been much worse." "The baby?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Still there, heartbeats strong." He shook his head. "I've never seen anything like this. It's as if something just let go." Alara turned her head and found Ronan still beside her, but something in his expression made her blood run cold. "What did you do?" she asked. "What I had to." "Ronan, what did you do?" He leaned down and pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I made a bargain. The pact wanted a choice, so I gave it one. Me for both of you. Full payment, no substitutions, no loopholes." "No!" The word came out strangled. "You can't— That's not—" "It's already done, Alara. The terms are set." He smoothed her hair back with gentle fingers. "You and our child get to live. That's all that matters." "When?" She grabbed his shirt. "When does it happen?" "The birth. The moment our child enters the world, the debt completes." His smile was sad. "Which gives us about 5 months. Not bad, considering." "I won't let you. I'll find a way to break it, to reverse—" "You can't. That's the point. The pact accepts no reversals once terms are set." He kissed her again. "Use the time we have left. That's all I ask." She wanted to scream, wanted to rage and fight and tear the world apart until she found a way to save him. But exhaustion dragged at her, and the physician was already pressing something to her lips that tasted bitter and promised sleep. "Don't give up," she managed, as darkness pulled her under. "Please, don't give up on us." She didn't hear his answer, didn't see the way his face crumpled the moment she was unconscious, didn't know that he went straight from her chambers to the deepest archives and began searching again with desperate, futile hope, because Ronan Hale would burn the world before he let his family pay for his mistakes. And somewhere in the shadows, something ancient and satisfied settled in to wait for its promised payment. Ronan found what he was looking for 3 weeks later in a place he should never have been able to access. The old catacombs beneath the keep had been sealed for generations, collapsed tunnels and deliberate cave-ins making them impassable. But desperation made men do foolish things, and Ronan had never been above foolishness when it came to protecting what was his. He'd had his most trusted men dig through 2 tons of rubble in secret, working at night while the court slept above, oblivious. What they found on the other side nearly stopped his heart. A chamber carved from living rock, walls covered in symbols that predated written language. And in the center, a stone altar stained black with centuries of something. Blood, probably, or whatever passed for blood and things that weren't entirely human. The air tasted wrong down here, metallic and cold, like breathing in winter and copper at the same time. Ronan's torchlight threw wild shadows across glyphs that seemed to writhe when he wasn't looking directly at them. Every instinct screamed at him to leave, to seal this place up again and pretend he'd never found it. But carved into the far wall, barely visible beneath layers of grime and age, were words in Old Northern script, the same script used in his great-great-grandmother's journal. The pact may be broken, but only by the one who made it. Blood calls to blood across the veil. Summon the first, offer the price, receive the freedom. Ronan read it 5 times, hand shaking so badly the torch nearly went out. The one who made it, his great-grandfather. Dead for over a century, bones long since turned to dust. But the old magic, the kind that had built this kingdom and bound it to forces humans weren't meant to traffic with, didn't care about death. Death was just another state of being. If you knew the right words, made the right offerings, you could reach across that veil and pull back pieces of what used to be. It was insane. Probably impossible. Definitely forbidden by every law, written and unwritten. Ronan was going to do it anyway. He spent the next 2 weeks preparing, gathering materials mentioned in fragmentary texts, stealing ingredients from the royal physicians' stores when they weren't looking, teaching himself rituals designed by men who'd understood that power always came with teeth attached. He didn't tell Ilara. Couldn't tell her because she was already fighting her own battle, trying to stay healthy while her body did its best to reject the pregnancy the pact had briefly threatened. The physicians kept her on bed rest. Marta watched her like a hawk, and Ronan visited every evening, sitting beside her bed and reading aloud from whatever book she'd requested, pretending everything was fine. Lying had never come naturally to him, but for her, he'd become an expert. "You're planning something," Ilara said one night, cutting through his reading mid-sentence. Ronan looked up. "What makes you say that?" "You get this expression, like you're doing math in your head and don't like the answer you're getting." She struggled to sit up, one hand pressed to her swelling stomach. "What are you planning?" "Nothing." "Ronan, I'm handling it." "That's not an answer." He set the book aside. "Do you trust me?" "That's not fair. You know I do." "Then trust that I am doing everything I can to fix this. And when there's something concrete to tell you, I will." He took her hand. "But right now, I need you to focus on staying healthy. Let me carry the rest." She didn't look convinced, but exhaustion was already pulling at her. The pregnancy had been brutal since the bleeding incident. Constant fatigue, waves of nausea, pains that came and went without warning. The physicians said it was normal, just her body adjusting. Ronan knew better. The pact was still there, still pressing on them like a weight, even if it had temporarily loosened its grip. 5 months, Ilara whispered. "That's all we have left." "I know. I keep thinking if I could just hold on, not give birth, stay pregnant forever." She laughed weakly. "Impossible, I know, but the moment this baby comes, I'm not going anywhere." He squeezed her hand. "I promise you, Ilara, I'm not leaving you to do this alone." It was the first outright lie he'd told her, because in 3 days he was going to attempt something that might kill him before the pact ever got the chance. The ritual required midnight, a new moon, and blood from a living hail. Ronan had the first 2. The third he provided himself, a deep cut across his palm that bled far more than he'd expected. He stood in the catacomb chamber surrounded by candles made from rendered fat and bone meal, following instructions written by a man who'd probably been half mad even when alive. The words he spoke were older than the kingdom, older than the language he'd grown up with. They felt wrong in his mouth, consonants that human throats weren't designed to shape, but he spoke them anyway. And when the last syllable left his lips, the temperature in the chamber dropped 20 degrees in an instant. The candles went out. All of them. Simultaneously. Ronan stood in absolute darkness, listening to his own heartbeat thunder in his ears. Nothing happened. The ritual had failed. He'd just wasted 2 weeks on... Something breathed behind him. He spun, and in the darkness, he saw a shape. Not quite human, not quite anything. Just a presence that suggested form without committing to one. "Bold," it said. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "Foolish, but bold." "Are you..." Ronan's voice came out rough. "Are you the one who made the pact?" "I am what remains, the echo of intention." The shape moved closer. "You seek to break what was bound?" "Yes." "Impossible. A pact made cannot be unmade." The inscription said, "The inscription lies." The presence laughed, a sound like grinding glass. Or truth told to desperate men sounds like lies when spoken aloud. I made the pact. I am dead. Death breaks nothing. The magic continues. Ronan felt his last hope crumble. Then why am I here? Why did the ritual work if there's nothing you can do? I did not say I could do nothing. I said the pact cannot be unmade. The shape solidified slightly, features suggesting themselves in the dark, a man's face or the memory of one. But it can be adjusted for a price. What price? The same price I paid when I made it originally, sacrifice of self. But not death, something deeper. You would take my place in the contract, become the anchor instead of the bloodline. Your life sustaining the kingdom's power until you choose to end it. Ronan tried to process that. You mean I'd be, what, trapped here? Not here, but bound, connected to the land itself, unable to leave, unable to die through normal means, a living ward against the chaos that existed before we claimed this territory. The shape moved closer still. Your queen and child would be free. The pact would accept you as payment in full, but you would never truly be with them again. How long? Until the kingdom falls, or you find someone willing to take your place. Could be years, centuries, millennia, if the land prospers. It was worse than death. Death would be clean, final. This was imprisonment, stretched across decades or longer, watching Alara and their child live and age and die while he remained frozen in service to magic he'd never wanted. But they'd live. That was what mattered. I accept, Ronan said. You haven't heard the full terms. I don't care. If it saves them, I accept. The presence was quiet for a long moment. Then, you love her very much. More than anything. Then you should know. The pact has already changed. Your bargain 5 months ago altered its nature. It learned what love was worth to a Hail King. And now it wants more. Ice flooded Ronan's veins. What are you talking about? The original pact was power for sacrifice, simple transaction. But you introduced a new element, emotional weight, the willingness to destroy yourself for another. The magic tasted that, liked it. Now it won't accept just your life as payment. Then what does it want? Her choice. Your queen must be the one to decide your fate. She must send you into this binding knowingly, willingly, with full understanding of what it costs. Only then will the debt be satisfied. No, she'll never. Then your child dies at birth, and you with it. Those are the terms. The presence began to fade. You have until the birth to convince her, or you all burn together. Wait, there has to be another way. But the darkness was just darkness again. The presence was gone. Ronan stood alone in the catacombs with the crushing weight of impossible choices pressing down on him. He couldn't ask Alara to make that decision. Couldn't put that on her, condemning him to eternal imprisonment with her own words. It would destroy her. Even if she did it to save their child, the guilt would eat her alive. But if he didn't ask, they all died. The pact would collect its payment one way or another. He stumbled out of the catacombs and made it halfway to his chambers before he had to stop and vomit in a darkened corridor. His hands shook. His whole body shook. The walls felt like they were closing in. Your Majesty? He looked up. One of his personal guards, Marcus, who'd served his father and grandfather before him, stood watching with concern. I'm fine, Ronan managed. With respect, you don't look fine. You look like you've seen a ghost. Close enough. I need you to do something for me. Don't ask questions, just do it. Marcus nodded slowly. Anything, Your Majesty. If something happens to me, if I disappear or die or become incapacitated somehow, you watch over the queen and my child. You make sure the court doesn't tear them apart fighting over the throne. Sir, swear it. On whatever you hold sacred, swear you'll protect them. Marcus went pale but didn't hesitate. I swear on my family's name and my own life. I'll guard them with everything I have. Good. Ronan straightened, trying to pull himself together. Don't tell anyone about this conversation. Not the queen, not the council. No one. He walked away before Marcus could respond, heading not to his chambers, but to the one place in the keep where he could think clearly. The tower observatory was freezing this time of year, but Ronan didn't care. He stood at the window looking out over the kingdom, his kingdom, bought and paid for with blood and magic and choices made by men who'd never had to live with the consequences. He stayed there until dawn, trying to find a solution that didn't exist. When he finally returned to check on Alara, he found her chambers in chaos. Marta met him at the door, face pale. "Your Majesty, thank the stars. She's asking for you." "What happened?" "Pain again, worse than before. The physicians are with her now, but—" Marta's voice cracked. "It's bad, sir. Really bad." Ronan shoved past her into the room. Alara was on the bed, curled on her side, face slick with sweat. The physician looked up when Ronan entered. "We need to talk," the old man said quietly. "Privately. Tell me here. Now." The physician glanced at Alara, who nodded weakly. "The pregnancy is failing. Her body can't sustain it. I've seen this before. The child is growing but taking too much from the mother. If we don't intervene, we'll lose them both." "Intervene how?" "Induce labor. Now, the child is viable enough to survive if we're careful. But if we wait—" "No," Alara gasped. "Not yet. We need more time." "Your Majesty, you don't have more time. Another week and you'll be too weak to survive the birth. I don't care. We can't—" She grabbed Ronan's hand. "The pact. If the baby comes now, you—" "I know." He pressed her hand to his face. "But the physician is right. If we wait, we lose you both anyway. There has to be another option." "There isn't." The physician's voice was gentle but firm. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty, but this is the only way." Alara looked at Ronan, and he saw everything in her eyes: fear, grief, desperation, love. So much love it nearly broke him. "We fight it," she whispered. "When the baby comes, we fight the pact together. We don't just accept—" "Alara, no, I won't lose you. I can't." Tears streamed down her face. "Please, there has to be a way to fight this." Ronan thought about the catacombs, the presence, the impossible choice that had just gotten impossibly worse. He could tell her now, explain what he'd learned, give her the option to send him into binding and save their child. She might even do it, might make that choice because she was brave and fierce and would sacrifice anything for their baby. And it would destroy the woman he loved more than his own life. Or he could say nothing, let the pact take them all. At least they'd go together. Neither option was bearable. "Start the preparations," he told the physician. "We induce labor tonight." "Ronan, no." "It's not a debate." He leaned down and kissed her forehead. "We're out of time, love, and I'm not watching you die by inches waiting for a miracle that won't come." She tried to argue, but another wave of pain hit and stole her breath. The physician immediately began issuing orders to his assistants. The room exploded into controlled chaos. Ronan stayed beside Alara through all of it, holding her hand while physicians prepared tinctures and solutions designed to force her body into labor before it was ready. She gripped his fingers hard enough to bruise. "I'm scared," she whispered when they were briefly alone. "I know. Me too." What happens after? He wanted to lie. Wanted to promise her everything would be fine, that they'd have years together raising their child, that the pact was just a bad dream. But he'd lied to her enough. "I don't know," he said quietly. "But whatever happens, know that I love you, that every moment with you was worth whatever comes next." "Don't." Her voice broke. "Don't talk like you're saying goodbye." "I'm not. I'm saying I love you. There's a difference." The physician returned before she could respond. "We're ready, Your Majesty. This will be difficult, but you need to stay calm and do exactly what I tell you." What followed was hours of agony Ronan knew he'd never forget. Alara's screams, the blood, too much blood, the physician's increasingly worried expression, assistants running in and out with supplies and equipment, and through it all, Ronan stayed beside her, letting her break his hand if that's what she needed, murmuring reassurances he didn't believe himself. Somewhere past midnight, the baby finally came. A thin, angry wail cut through the room. The physician moved fast, cutting the cord, wrapping the tiny body in clean cloth. "A boy," he said, breathless. "You have a son, Your Majesties." Alara sobbed, relief and joy and exhaustion all mixed together. "Is he—" "Small but healthy." Strong lungs, that's a good sign. The physician placed the bundle in Alara's arms carefully. He's a fighter, this one. Ronan stared at his son, barely bigger than Alara's forearm, face red and scrunched, fists waving angrily at being evicted from the only world he'd known. Something fundamental shifted in his chest. This was his child, his blood, his legacy, his reason for everything. He's perfect, Alara breathed. She looked up at Ronan with exhausted triumph. We did it. He's here, and he's... She stopped. Her expression changed. Ronan, she whispered, something's wrong. He felt it too. A shift in the air, like reality bending around them. The temperature dropped. Shadows in the corners of the room grew deeper, darker, hungry. The pact was collecting. Everyone out, Ronan ordered. Now. Your Majesty, the Queen needs... Out! The physician and his assistants fled. Marta hesitated at the door, looking back at Alara with worry, but ultimately obeyed. The door closed, leaving the three of them alone. The shadow thing manifested between one breath and the next, not the presence from the catacombs. This was something older, darker, more fundamentally wrong. It filled the room like smoke pressing against the walls, and when it spoke, the voice came from the shadows themselves. Debt comes due. Payment required. The terms have been set. Wait. Ronan stepped forward. I made a bargain. Different terms. I spoke to terms accepted but incomplete. The Queen must choose. Speak the words, Your Majesty. Send him into binding, or lose all you hold dear. Alara's face went white. What is it talking about? Don't listen to it. Just hold our son and... What is it talking about? The shadow thing laughed. He didn't tell you. How precious. Your king went delving in forbidden places, seeking ways to break unbreakable things. He found a path, one that requires your voice to activate. Speak the binding words, condemn him to eternal service, and your child lives. Refuse and I take both king and prince as payment. That's not... Alara looked at Ronan, betrayal and understanding dawning together. You found a way and didn't tell me? Because it requires you to send me to something worse than death. I couldn't ask that of you. But you'd rather we all die? I'd rather find another option. There is no other option. She struggled to sit up, still clutching their son. The pact's been clear from the beginning. It wants sacrifice. If you found a way to give it that and save our child, then it would destroy you, having to make that choice, speak those words, knowing what they do to me. Alara, it would eat you alive. So you'd rather let our son die? Her voice was rising, edged with hysteria. That's your solution? Let the pact take him because you can't stand the thought of me feeling guilty? That's not what I thought. Then what? Tell me. Because from where I'm sitting, you're choosing your pride over our child's life. It's not pride, it's trying to protect you from... I don't need protection. I need honesty. I need you to trust that I'm strong enough to make impossible choices. The shadow thing pulsed, growing larger. Time runs short. Choose, or I choose for you. Alara looked down at their son, then back at Ronan. Her eyes were red, but her voice came out steady. Tell me what I have to say. No. Tell me, now. Alara, please. Our son's life is on the line, and you're still trying to make this decision for me. Tell me the words, or I swear I can't, Ronan's voice broke. I can't tell you, because the moment you speak them, I lose you. Not just physically, I lose the right to your love, your loyalty, everything we've built. The binding severs emotional ties to ensure I stay focused on the kingdom. You'll forget what we had, maybe forget me entirely, and I'll remember every second of it for the rest of eternity. So no, I won't tell you the words because living forever remembering that you loved me once is worse than any death this pact can deliver. Silence crashed down. Alara stared at him, face pale. It takes my memories? Eventually. The binding erodes connection to make the magic sustainable. You'd have impressions, maybe, but not... His throat closed. Not us. Not what we were. She looked down at their son again. The baby had gone quiet, eyes closed, face peaceful, unaware that his parents were tearing each other apart trying to save him. Is there truly no other way? she asked quietly. If there is, I haven't found it. And if I don't speak the words, we lose him. And you. Yes. But if I do speak them, I lose you anyway, just differently. Ronan wanted to argue, but she was right. Either way, their family was forfeit. The pact had made sure of that from the beginning. The shadow thing pressed closer. Choose now. Alara took a shaking breath. Tell me the words. Alara, tell me. Please, let me make this choice for myself. He looked at her, really looked at her, memorizing every detail. The way she held their son like he was made of glass and starlight. The stubborn set of her jaw that he'd loved from the first time she'd challenged him. The eyes that had seen through every wall he'd built and loved him anyway. This was goodbye. One way or another, this was goodbye. So he told her. Recited the words in Old Northern that would bind him to the kingdom's service and sever the emotional ties that made him vulnerable to distraction. She repeated them carefully, pronunciation nearly perfect, despite never having studied the language. The moment the last syllable left her lips, the world exploded into cold fire. Ronan felt the binding take hold like chains wrapping around his soul. The room spun. His connection to Alara, that warm, constant awareness of her presence, began to fray at the edges. He tried to hold on, tried to fight it, but the magic was older and stronger and absolutely merciless. No, he gasped. Not yet. Please, not yet. But it was already happening. Alara's face blurred. The love in her eyes flickered, confused, like she was trying to remember why she felt so strongly about the man in front of her. Ronan? She sounded uncertain. I love you, he said desperately, needing her to hear it one last time. I love you and our son, and I'm sorry I couldn't find a better way. She blinked, frowning. The shadow thing pulsed with satisfaction. Debt paid, terms satisfied, the binding is complete. Then it was gone, and Ronan was collapsing, the physical and magical toll hitting him all at once. He hit the floor hard, vision graying out. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was Alara staring down at him with the polite concern she'd give any injured stranger, like she'd never loved him at all. When he woke, he was alone in a chamber he didn't recognize. Stone walls, no windows, a single torch providing minimal light. He tried to sit up and found himself unable to move, not physically restrained, but bound by something deeper. The magic holding him in place until it was ready to deploy him wherever the kingdom needed. This was his eternity. Isolation, service, the slow erosion of everything that made him human. He thought he'd been prepared for it. He wasn't. Somewhere above him, in the keep he'd called home, Alara would be waking up with their son. She'd have scattered memories of a marriage, probably. Enough to know they'd been important to each other once. But not the depth of it. Not the desperate, all-consuming love that had driven them to break every rule. That was his alone to carry now. Forever. In her chambers, Alara held her son and tried to understand why she felt like something essential had been torn away. The physicians said it was normal. Childbirth was traumatic. Hormones were everywhere. Her body and mind needed time to recover. But it felt like more than that. It felt like she'd lost something she couldn't name. She looked down at the baby in her arms. Your father, she murmured, testing the words. King Ronan, he was... What? What was he? Husband, yes. Father of her child, obviously. But there was a blank space where deeper feelings should be, like trying to remember a dream after waking, impressions without substance. He loved us, she whispered, certain of that much, even if she couldn't remember why she knew it. He did something to save us. The baby stirred, tiny hand grasping at air. Alara caught it gently, letting those impossibly small fingers wrap around one of hers. I'll figure it out, she promised. Whatever he did, whatever this is, I'll find a way to fix it. I won't let his sacrifice be for nothing. But deep in the catacombs, locked in magical stasis, Ronan knew there was no fixing this. The pact had won. Completely. Absolutely. And they'd all lost everything that mattered. 3 months passed before Alara started having the dreams. Not nightmares this time. Fragments. Pieces of memory that didn't quite fit with the narrative everyone kept telling her. The court said King Ronan had died the night their son was born. A sudden illness. tragic but swift. They'd mourned appropriately, held a funeral with full honors, sealed his body in the royal crypt, but Alara couldn't shake the feeling that they were lying. She'd stand in front of the crypt sometimes, late at night when the keep was quiet, staring at the marble effigy and trying to make it make sense. The statue looked like him, strong features, stern expression, hands crossed over his chest in eternal rest. But something about it felt wrong, empty, like it was marking a grave that held nothing. "Your Majesty shouldn't be down here alone," Marcus said from the shadows. She didn't turn around. The guard had been hovering since the birth, always nearby, always watching. It should have annoyed her. Instead, it felt almost comforting, like he knew something she didn't and was trying to protect her from it. "Did you see him die?" she asked. Marcus went very still. "Your Majesty, I'm asking a simple question. Were you there when King Ronan died?" "No, ma'am. I was outside your chambers guarding the door during the birth." "Then how do you know he's actually dead?" Silence stretched between them. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice was careful. "The court physicians confirmed it. The council witnessed the body before interment. There's no question. But you didn't see it yourself." "No." "Then you don't actually know, do you?" She turned to face him. "You're taking their word for it, just like I am." Marcus's expression was unreadable. "What are you suggesting, Your Majesty?" "I don't know. That's the problem." She looked back at the effigy. "I feel like there's a hole in my memory, like someone reached in and scooped out pieces of what happened that night. And everyone keeps telling me it's normal. Trauma, childbirth, grief. But it doesn't feel normal. It feels deliberate. Perhaps you should speak to the physicians. I have. They give me tonics and tell me to rest. But rest doesn't help when you're missing parts of yourself." She pressed her hand to the cold marble. "I loved him. I know I did. But I can't remember how it felt. Can't remember the moments that made it real. It's like trying to hold water. I know it was there, but I can't grasp it." Marcus moved closer. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "What if I told you that you're not imagining things?" Alara's heart stuttered. "What?" "What if I told you that the night your son was born, King Ronan made me swear an oath to protect you and the prince if anything happened to him, and that something did happen, something the court doesn't want you to remember?" "What kind of something?" "I don't know the details, but I know he didn't die, not in any normal way." Marcus glanced toward the corridor, checking they were alone. "The morning after the birth, I went to check on him. His chambers were empty. Not just empty, stripped, like he'd never existed. And when I asked the council what happened, Lord Castellan told me the king had passed during the night, and I was to forget I'd ever questioned it." "But you didn't forget." "No, because I'd sworn an oath, and dead men don't need guards to watch over their families. He knew something was coming. He prepared for it. And whatever it was, the court wants it buried." Alara's hands were shaking. "If he's not dead, where is he?" "That's what we need to find out." The dreams intensified after that conversation, flashes of memory breaking through whatever block had been placed on her mind. Ronan's face close to hers in darkness, his voice saying words in a language she didn't speak. The weight of their son in her arms while shadows pressed close. And underneath it all, a bone-deep certainty. She'd made a choice. Spoken words that had cost her everything. She started researching, quietly at first, pulling dusty volumes from the royal library when no one was watching. Then more boldly, when she realized the court wasn't actually paying attention to what the widowed queen did with her time. They'd written her off as a grieving mother, harmless and broken. They had no idea what they'd unleashed. "Your Majesty, you have visitors." Marta appeared in the library doorway, looking uncomfortable. "Lord Castellan and Lady Bronwyn. They're requesting an audience." Alara looked up from a text about ancient northern magic. "Tell them I'm indisposed." "I already tried that, ma'am. They insist it's urgent." Of course they did. The council had been circling for weeks, making noises about regency and proper guardianship, and whether a woman alone could adequately rule while raising an heir. Alara had been ignoring them. Apparently they'd decided to push harder. She closed the book and followed Marta to the receiving room where Castellan and Bronwyn waited. Both wore expressions of practiced concern that didn't reach their eyes. "Your Majesty," Castellan began. "Thank you for seeing us." What do you want? Bronwyn's lips thinned. Direct as always, very well. We're concerned about your behavior lately. Spending hours in the library, neglecting your duties, asking strange questions about the late king's death. I'm not neglecting anything. The kingdom runs fine. The kingdom runs because the council handles matters you've abandoned, Castellan cut in. We understand you're grieving, but there are responsibilities. Don't talk to me about responsibilities. Alara stood, done with this conversation. You want to discuss my behavior? Let's discuss yours. 3 months ago, my husband allegedly died. No one saw it happen. No one can tell me exactly how or why. The body was sealed in the crypt within hours. No examination, no questions allowed. And now you're telling me to stop asking about it because it's inconvenient for the council? Your Majesty, this is inappropriate. No, what's inappropriate is lying to your queen. She moved closer, watching them both carefully. What happened to Ronan? The real story, not the fiction you fed the court. Castellan and Bronwyn exchanged glances. Some silent communication passed between them. The king died of a sudden illness, Castellan said slowly. As we've told you repeatedly, if you can't accept that truth, perhaps we need to consider whether grief has compromised your ability to rule effectively. It was a threat, thinly veiled but unmistakable. Accept the official story or face challenges to her regency. Alara smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. You know what I've learned spending all that time in the library? The old laws are very clear about regency rights. A queen mother cannot be removed from power without proof of incapacity or wrongdoing. And grief doesn't qualify as either. So unless you're planning to fabricate evidence, which would be treason, you have no authority to question my rule. Bronwyn's face flushed. How dare you suggest? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating facts. You don't like that I'm asking questions, so you're trying to intimidate me into silence. But I'm done being intimidated. She moved to the door, opening it. This audience is over, and the next time you want to discuss my fitness to rule, bring actual evidence or don't bother showing up. They left, spitting venom disguised as concern. The moment they were gone, Alara sagged against the doorframe. Her hands were shaking again. She'd just burned bridges with 2 of the most powerful nobles in the kingdom, made enemies she couldn't afford. But she'd also drawn a line. No more pretending, no more accepting lies just because they were convenient. That was either very brave or very stupid, Marcus said from his post in the corridor. Probably both. Alara straightened. They know something. The way they reacted when I pushed, they're hiding what really happened. Then we need to find proof before they find a way to remove you. We need to find Ronan, if he's alive somewhere, bound by the pact or magic or whatever the hell happened that night. She stopped. The catacombs. You said his chambers were stripped. What about the old catacombs beneath the keep? Those have been sealed for generations, collapsed tunnels, unstable. Then that's exactly where they'd hide something they didn't want found. It took them 2 days to locate the access point. Marcus recruited 3 guards he trusted absolutely, men who'd served under Ronan and still remembered their oaths. Together, they moved rubble that was supposed to be immovable, working in shifts during the night when the court slept above. What they found confirmed Alara's worst fears. The chamber was exactly as Ronan had left it. Candles burned down to stubs, ritual markings on the floor, dried blood on the altar, and carved into the wall in his handwriting, a message. If you're reading this, I'm bound. The pact accepted my service in exchange for your lives. Don't try to break it. Just live. That's all I ask. Alara traced the letters with shaking fingers. He's alive. He's somewhere in this fortress trapped by magic, and they knew. The council knew, and they buried it. Why would they do that? One of the guards asked. Because a bound king is easier to control than a real one, Marcus said grimly. They get the power that comes from the pact being satisfied, but they don't have to answer to anyone. They're ruling through the queen, and if she gets difficult, they replace her with a regency council. Not if I replace them first. Everyone turned to stare at Alara. Your Majesty, Marcus said carefully, you can't just remove half the council. It would destabilize. The kingdom is already unstable. We're being ruled by people who lie about where their king went and think I'm too weak to notice. She looked at each of them. I need to know who I can trust. Who in this court actually serves the crown versus serving their own interests? They gave her 6 names. 6 nobles out of dozens who'd remained loyal to Ronan's memory, who'd questioned the official story quietly, who might stand with her if she made a move. It wasn't enough. But it was a start. Alara spent the next week making careful alliances, not openly, she couldn't afford to tip her hand too soon, but quiet conversations in gardens and libraries, feeling out positions, learning who could be swayed and who was too deep in Castellan's pocket. By the end of it, she had 9 confirmed allies. Still not enough to challenge the council directly, but enough to make them nervous. Then her son started screaming. Not normal baby crying, something deeper, more visceral. It started one night and didn't stop for hours. The physicians examined him repeatedly and found nothing wrong. But Alara knew better. She'd felt this before, the pact pressing close, magic acting on things it had marked. "What's happening to him?" she demanded of the physician. "I don't know, Your Majesty. Physically he's fine, but something is clearly distressing him." She held her son close, feeling him writhe and wail against her chest. His tiny face was red, mouth open in endless screaming that tore at something primal in her chest. And underneath the sound, she could almost hear words, echoes of that ancient voice from her fractured memories. Incomplete. Debt incomplete. The binding weakens. The pact wasn't satisfied, or the binding was failing. Either way, her son was paying the price. "I need to see the archives again," she told Marcus. "Everything we have on the pact. There has to be something about maintaining the binding, keeping it stable. Your Majesty, you should rest. Let me handle." "No." She was already moving, son still screaming in her arms. "I'm not resting while my child suffers. Help me or get out of my way." They found it 3 hours later in a text so old the pages crumbled at her touch. A passage about magical bindings and the cost of maintaining them. A binding fed by sacrifice requires renewal. Blood given freely at the turning of seasons, or the magic consumes itself and those it was meant to protect. "Renewal," Alara whispered. "The binding needs to be fed. And if it's not, it takes from the nearest available source," Marcus finished. "Your son." "How do we renew it? The passage says blood given freely, but whose blood? Mine? Maybe. Or maybe..." Marcus hesitated. "Maybe it needs to be from the one who's bound. Ronan's blood." "Then we need to find him. Now, before this gets worse." The search became desperate. They tore through the catacombs, checking every chamber, every sealed door, every space that might hide a man trapped by magic. Hours passed. Alara's son continued screaming, his cries growing weaker as whatever force was feeding on him drained more and more. "There." Marcus pointed to a section of wall that looked different from the rest. Newer stone. Deliberate placement. That wasn't here before. They attacked it with tools stolen from the smithy. The wall came down in chunks, revealing a chamber beyond that made Alara's breath catch. Ronan was there. Not dead. Not exactly alive either. Suspended in some kind of stasis, standing upright with eyes closed, hands at his sides. Frost covered his skin and clothes. When Alara touched him, he was cold as winter stone. "Ronan," her voice cracked. "Can you hear me?" No response. He didn't move, didn't breathe, gave no sign of awareness. "The binding is holding him," Marcus said quietly, "keeping him frozen until the kingdom needs whatever power he provides. Then we break it. Your Majesty, we don't know how..." "Blood given freely. That's what the text said." Alara looked down at her son, still crying weakly against her chest, then at Ronan, frozen and unreachable. "My blood broke it before. Maybe it can break it again. Or maybe it kills you both." "Then at least we tried." She didn't give him time to argue, just pulled the knife from Marcus's belt, sliced across her palm, and pressed the bleeding cut to Ronan's frozen hand. For a moment, nothing happened. Then light exploded through the chamber, white and blinding and absolutely soundless. Alara felt power surge through her, ancient and hungry, tasting her blood and weighing her intention. She held on, refusing to let go even when the magic tried to burn through her. "I'm calling the debt paid," she said through gritted teeth. "Release him, now." The power pushed back, testing her resolve. But Alara had spent 7 years being tested by a court that wanted her broken. She'd given birth while magic tried to tear her apart. She'd lost the man she loved to a pact that fed on sacrifice. She was done being afraid of power that thought it owned her. I said release him. Something in the magic fractured. Not broke entirely, but cracked. Enough. Ronan gasped, eyes flying open. The frost on his skin began to melt. He stumbled forward and would have fallen if Alara hadn't caught him. Alara? His voice was raw. How did you? Don't talk. Just breathe. She supported his weight, one arm around him while the other still held their son. The baby had stopped screaming, she realized. Was quiet now, staring at Ronan with wide eyes. The binding, Ronan managed. You can't break it. The pact is killing our son. I'm not letting that happen. She met his eyes, and something sparked. Recognition, maybe. Or the beginning of memory returning. I don't know exactly what happened 3 months ago, what I did or said or agreed to, but I know you're here, trapped, while I'm up there pretending you're dead, and I know our son is suffering because the magic isn't being maintained properly. So we're going to fix this. You can't. The terms were clear. I'm bound until nothing. You found a loophole once before, didn't you? That's what all this was. You finding a way to satisfy the pact without actually dying. So we'll find another one. Another way to feed the binding without you being locked down here forever. Alara, it doesn't work like that. Then we'll make it work. She shifted her grip on him. I didn't spend 7 years fighting for this marriage just to lose you to magic that thinks it owns us. Now come on, we're getting you out of here. Marcus and the guards helped them navigate back through the catacombs. Ronan was weak, could barely walk on his own, but he was there. Real. Alive. Not the marble effigy in the crypt or the ghost in Alara's fractured memories. They got him to Alara's chambers without being seen, no small feat considering the man looked like he'd been dead for 3 months. Marta took one look at him and went pale. Your Majesty, she breathed. Is that not a word to anyone? Understood? Of course, ma'am. I'll get water and food and... She fled, probably to have a breakdown somewhere private. Alara got Ronan into a chair and their son into his arms. The baby stared at his father with solemn intensity, one tiny hand reaching up to touch Ronan's face. He knows you, Alara said softly. He shouldn't. The binding was supposed to sever... Ronan stopped, something like wonder crossing his features. I can feel it. The connection. It's still there. What does that mean? It means the binding isn't complete, which means the pact isn't fully satisfied. He looked up at her. Which means we're all still in danger. Then we finish this, properly, not by hiding you in a hole and pretending you're dead, but by actually satisfying the terms in a way that doesn't destroy our family. I tried that. It didn't work. Because you tried alone. We do this together or not at all. Ronan stared at her for a long moment. Then something in his expression shifted. Hope, maybe. Or the beginning of it. You really don't remember, do you? What happened that night? What you gave up? I remember pieces. You told me something about the binding. I spoke words that cost us both. She knelt in front of him. But I also remember loving you. Maybe I can't recall the specific moments that built that feeling, but it's still there. Like a song I've forgotten the words to, but can still hum. The binding was supposed to erase that. Make you forget me entirely. Then it failed, because I never stopped looking for you. He reached out with his free hand and cupped her face. I'm sorry. For all of it. For the pact. For the binding. For every moment I put you through hell trying to protect you. Save your apologies. We have work to do. But she leaned into his touch just for a moment. Let herself feel the warmth of his palm against her skin and the rightness of him being here. Then she stood and moved to the table where she'd spread out documents and texts. Here's what I know. The binding requires renewal. Blood given freely at seasonal intervals. You've been frozen for 3 months, which means the spring renewal was missed. The magic started feeding on our son instead because he carries your blood. So we give it what it wants. I return to the binding, provide the renewal. No. We find a different source. She pulled out the oldest text. According to this, the pact accepts substitution under specific circumstances. If we can prove that someone else's service provides equal value to the kingdom, no one else can satisfy it. The pact was made specifically with Hale blood. Hale blood. not necessarily your blood. She looked at their son. He's a Hale too. So am I, by marriage. What if the binding accepts a different anchor, someone willing to share the burden instead of carrying it alone? Ronan went very still. You're suggesting we bind all three of us? I'm suggesting we restructure the terms. Make it a shared responsibility instead of a single sacrifice. You said the magic wants connection to the land, power to sustain the kingdom. Fine, give it that. But spread the cost across multiple people so no one gets destroyed by it. That's actually not insane. He was staring at her like he'd never seen her before. It might even work. If we can convince the pact to accept modified terms, then we do it together. Right now, before the council realizes you're not dead and tries to stop us. They spent the rest of the night preparing. Marcus brought supplies, salt and silver, herbs that grew only in the deepest parts of the forest, wine made from fruit that had never seen sunlight. All the traditional components of old magic rituals. This is a terrible idea, he muttered, arranging candles in specific patterns. You know that, right? You're essentially gambling your lives on magic accepting a contract renegotiation. You have a better suggestion? Alara asked. Several, none of which involve ancient blood pacts and potential death. Then unless you're willing to watch our son die slowly while Ronan stays frozen in the catacombs, this is what we're doing. Marcus sighed but didn't argue further. They performed the ritual at midnight, the turning point between one day and the next, when magic was supposedly most flexible. Alara stood with Ronan and their son in the center of the circle, all three of them bleeding from small cuts on their palms. Their blood mixed in a silver bowl while they spoke words in Old Northern, asking the pact to hear new terms. For a long time, nothing happened. Then the shadows in the room began to move. Not the shadow thing from before, something older, more fundamental. The pact itself, maybe, responding to the challenge. You offer modification, it said in a voice like shifting earth. 3 where 1 stood. Why should this be accepted? Because one person carrying the entire burden weakens over time, Alara said. But 3 sharing it creates stability, redundancy. The kingdom stays protected even if one of us falls. And the child? You would bind an infant to this service? I would give my son a choice. When he's grown, he can decide whether to maintain his part of the binding. Until then, we carry his portion. The presence considered this. Bold, risky. The magic might accept such terms, or it might consume you all for the presumption. Then I guess we're about to find out, Ronan said. Light exploded through the room again, different than before. Not white, but spectrum-colored, like looking at the world through broken glass. Alara felt the binding settle over her like a mantle, heavy but not crushing. Felt her awareness expand beyond the chamber, touching the edges of the kingdom itself. Forests and mountains, rivers and roads, all connected through threads of power. It was overwhelming, terrifying, and somehow exactly right. Beside her, Ronan gasped. Their son made a small sound, not distress, but something almost like curiosity. The binding wove between them, connecting all 3 in a pattern that felt ancient and new at the same time. When the light faded, they were all still standing, still breathing, still alive. Did it work? Marcus asked from outside the circle. Alara looked at Ronan. He looked back at her, and slowly they both smiled. It worked, she said. The pact accepted the modification. Which means you're all bound now. Shared binding, lighter load, better survival rate. She looked down at their son, who seemed perfectly content despite having just been tied to ancient magic. And when he's old enough, he gets to choose whether to keep it. That's actually brilliant. Marcus shook his head. Insane, but brilliant. The question now, Ronan said quietly, is what happens when the council finds out I'm not actually dead? Let them find out. Alara felt steadier than she had in months. Let them try to explain why they sealed an empty tomb and lied to the entire kingdom. We hold all the cards now. They spent the next 2 days preparing for the revelation, gathering their allies, building a case against Castellan and Bronwyn and every noble who'd participated in the cover-up. When they were ready, Alara called a full court session, mandatory attendance, no exceptions. The nobles filed in looking curious and slightly annoyed at being summoned. Castellan sat in his usual position of prominence, expression neutral. Bronwyn whispered to her neighbors, probably spreading gossip. Then Ronan walked in. The reaction was immediate and spectacular. Gasps, screams, several people actually fainting. Castellan went white as death. Bronwyn looked like she might vomit. "Good morning," Ronan said pleasantly, taking his place beside Alara's throne. "I understand there's been some confusion about my status. Let me clear that up. I'm alive. I've been alive this entire time. And I'm very interested to hear why the council told my wife I was dead." Chaos erupted. Nobles shouting questions, guards rushing forward to confirm it was really him, the physician demanding to examine him immediately. Through it all, Castellan sat frozen, clearly trying to calculate how badly he'd just lost. Alara let it go on for a few minutes. Then she stood, and the room fell silent. "Lord Castellan," she said clearly, "you told me my husband died of sudden illness. You sealed his tomb within hours. You threatened my regency when I asked questions. I'm giving you one chance to explain yourself before I charge you with treason." Castellan's mouth worked soundlessly. Finally, "Your Majesty, I can explain. I'm waiting. The king made a bargain with the pact, bound himself to protect the kingdom. We thought—" He stopped, clearly realizing there was no good way to finish that sentence. "We thought it would be easier if you believed him dead rather than trapped." Easier for whom? For everyone. The kingdom needed stability. Announcing that the king was magically bound would have caused panic. So you lied, sealed an empty tomb, let me grieve a death that never happened, and when I started asking questions, you tried to remove me from power to protect your own positions. Alara moved down from the dais, every eye in the room on her. "That's treason, Lord Castellan, against the crown and against me personally." "Your Majesty, please. You're stripped of your titles and lands, you and everyone who participated in this deception, effective immediately." She looked at Bronwyn. "That includes you, my lady. I hope your concern for propriety was worth your family's future." Bronwyn opened her mouth to protest, then clearly thought better of it. Castellan, on the other hand, surged to his feet. "You can't do this! The council—" "The council answers to the crown. I am the crown." Alara's voice was ice. "And if anyone else has a problem with that, they're welcome to join Lord Castellan in exile. Any takers?" Silence. Absolute. Complete. "Good. Then we're clear." She returned to her throne, Ronan taking his place beside her. "This kingdom has been ruled by lies and manipulation for too long. That ends today. We move forward with honesty, or we don't move forward at all." The session ended in stunned silence. Nobles filed out slowly, casting glances back at the thrones where king and queen sat united. The balance of power had just shifted drastically, and everyone knew it. Marcus approached once the room had cleared. "That was quite the statement, Your Majesty. It needed to be made." Alara looked at Ronan. "We're going to have enemies now, real ones. We already had enemies. Now they just know we're done playing nice." He took her hand. "You are magnificent, by the way. Absolutely terrifying. I learned from the best." She squeezed his fingers. "So what now?" "Now we figure out how to actually rule a kingdom while managing a shared magical binding. Should be fun." She laughed. Actually laughed. Bright and genuine. "We're either going to be the greatest rulers this kingdom has ever seen, or we're going to burn everything to the ground trying." "Why not both?" In her arms, their son made a small sound of contentment, like he agreed with his father's assessment. Alara looked down at him, then at Ronan, then out at the keep that had tried so hard to break them both. They'd lost so much getting here. Time, memories, pieces of themselves that could never be fully recovered. But they'd also gained something the old pact had never counted on, the will to fight back. To refuse sacrifice when there were other options. To remake the rules instead of accepting them as unchangeable. The kingdom didn't know it yet, but everything had just changed. And the Baron Queen who'd once walked cold corridors hoping for scraps of affection? She was gone. In her place stood someone far more dangerous, a woman who'd learned that power didn't ask permission. It took what it needed and made no apologies. The rebellion came 3 weeks later, exactly as Alara had predicted. Lord Castellan might have been stripped of his titles, but he still had allies, bitter nobles who'd profited from the old system and had no interest in serving a queen who'd just proven she had teeth. They gathered in the southern provinces, rallying lords who felt threatened by the sudden shift in power. The message arrived at dawn, delivered by a rider who'd nearly killed his horse getting there. Marcus brought it directly to the throne room where Ilara and Ronan were reviewing grain distribution reports. "Your Majesties," he said, and his tone made both of them look up immediately. "We have a problem." The letter was brief and brutally clear. Castellan had declared Ronan's return fraudulent, some trick of magic meant to deceive the kingdom. He claimed the real king was dead, that Ilara had gone mad with grief and was being manipulated by dark forces. He was raising an army to liberate the capital and restore proper order. In other words, civil war. "How many has he gathered?" Ronan asked, his voice deadly calm. "Initial reports say 3,000, maybe more by the time they march." "And we have?" "The Royal Guard, about 800, plus whatever levies we can raise from loyal houses, but that takes time we don't have." Ilara set down the letter carefully. Her hands weren't shaking. That surprised her. 3 weeks ago, news like this would have sent her into panic. Now she just felt cold certainty settling into her bones. "When will they reach the capital?" she asked. 5 days, maybe 6 if the weather turns. Then we have 5 days to prepare. She looked at Ronan. "Can the binding help? Give us some kind of advantage?" "Maybe. The shared connection means we can sense threats to the kingdom's stability, but actual military power?" He shook his head. "The pact was designed to protect against external forces, magical threats, natural disasters. It doesn't make us better warriors." "Then we need to be smarter instead of stronger." Ilara stood, moving to the large map of the kingdom mounted on the wall. "Castellan is expecting us to meet him in open battle. Standard tactics, traditional warfare. What if we don't?" "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we use the one advantage he can't counter. We know this land better than he does. The binding connects us to it, right? Every forest, every mountain, every hidden path. We use that. Make the kingdom itself our weapon." Ronan studied the map, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Guerrilla tactics, hit and run, make them fight on our terms instead of theirs." "Exactly. And while they're scattered and confused, we take out the leadership, Castellan himself. Without him, the rebellion falls apart." Marcus looked between them. "That's risky. Assassination attempts rarely work cleanly." "Good thing I'm not planning an assassination." Ilara traced a route on the map with one finger. "I'm planning a conversation in front of his entire army, where he has to explain to 3,000 men why he's rebelling against a king who's very clearly alive and standing right there. He'll just claim Ronan is an imposter, some magical construct. Then we prove otherwise, publicly, undeniably." She turned to Ronan. "The binding leaves marks, doesn't it? Physical signs that were connected to the kingdom's magic?" He nodded slowly. "On the skin, patterns that appear under certain conditions, but they're not always visible. Make them visible. We show his army exactly what Castellan's been denying, that you're not dead, not an imposter, just a king who made a sacrifice to protect his people. And then we ask them which side they'd rather be on, the one that fights for the kingdom, or the one that's been lying to them for months." It was audacious, probably insane, definitely dangerous. But the alternative was throwing 800 guards against 3,000 rebels in a battle they'd almost certainly lose. "I'll make the preparations," Marcus said. "But Your Majesty, if it goes wrong, we fight anyway and probably die. So let's make sure it doesn't go wrong." The next 5 days were organized chaos. Ilara reached out through the binding, that strange connection to the land itself, feeling for loyal houses, paths through the wilderness, anything that could give them an edge. It was exhausting. The magic wasn't designed for constant use like this, and every time she pushed too hard, pain spiked through her skull. But she kept going, because the alternative was letting Castellan tear apart everything they'd built. Ronan worked on the military logistics, coordinating with Marcus to position their limited forces where they'd do the most good. Not enough to stop the rebel army, but enough to harry them, make them nervous, keep them off balance until Ilara's plan could be executed. Their son stayed with Marta in the most secure part of the keep, surrounded by guards who'd sworn blood oaths to protect him. Ilara hated being separated, but she couldn't risk bringing him into what was coming. "He'll be fine," Ronan said, finding her standing outside the nursery at midnight. "Marta would die before letting anything happen to him." "I know, She stopped. "What if we don't come back from this?" "Then he'll have the kingdom. The binding passes to blood, remember? He'll carry it forward." "That's not what I mean. I'm asking what happens if we fail and Castellan wins. What kind of world does our son grow up in?" Ronan pulled her close. "We're not going to fail." "You can't know that." "No, but I can choose to believe it anyway." He kissed her forehead. "We've survived worse than a jumped-up lord with delusions of grandeur. We'll survive this too." She wanted to believe him, needed to believe him, so she wrapped her arms around his waist and let herself have this moment of peace before the storm. The rebel army arrived on the 6th day, exactly as Marcus had predicted. Alara watched them from the watchtower, counting banners and estimating numbers. 3,000 had been conservative, closer to 4 now, with more lords having joined once they heard Castellan was making a real play for power. "That's a lot of people who want us dead," Marcus observed. "That's a lot of people who've been lied to," Alara corrected. "Let's see if we can convince them otherwise." They rode out at noon under a white flag, traditional symbol of parley. Just Alara, Ronan, and Marcus, with 20 guards trailing at a respectful distance. The rebel army watched them approach, weapons ready but held. Castellan met them at the edge of his camp, surrounded by his own guards. He looked older than he had 3 weeks ago, stress and anger aging him rapidly. "Your Majesty," he said, mockery dripping from the title. "Come to surrender?" "Come to talk," Alara replied. "Though I'm curious what you think I'd be surrendering. I still hold the capital, still have the crown, still have the support of every house that matters. You have a fraud on the throne and delusions of competence. Neither will save you when my army marches." "Your army?" She looked past him at the assembled men, farmers and craftsmen mostly, a few professional soldiers, but not many. "Tell me, Lord Castellan, what did you promise them? Glory? Wealth? Or just a return to the good old days when nobles like you could lie without consequence?" "I promised them freedom from a queen who's lost her mind and a king who's already dead." "Funny, because the king seems pretty alive to me." She gestured at Ronan. "Care to explain how that works?" "Magic, trickery. You've always had a talent for deception, Your Majesty. Should I list the ways you've manipulated this court since the beginning?" "Please do. I'd love to hear your version of events." Castellan's face flushed. "You seduced the king into breaking the pact, endangered the entire kingdom with your selfishness. Then when the consequences came, you hid them, buried the king in the catacombs and pretended everything was fine. And now you parade this construct around like we're all stupid enough to believe it's really him." "If I'm a construct," Ronan said quietly, "then I'm a remarkably good one. I remember everything, Castellan, including the conversation we had 2 years ago when you tried to convince me to set Alara aside for a more suitable bride. What did you call her? A pretty ornament with no real value?" Castellan went pale. That conversation had been private. No one else knew about it. "You also embezzled funds from the royal treasury," Ronan continued. "Small amounts, carefully hidden. I knew about it, but let it slide because the kingdom had bigger problems. Want me to provide exact figures? Because I can do that. Down to the copper." You can't possibly. I'm not a construct. I'm not dead. I'm the same man you tried to control for years, except now I'm done pretending you have any real power." Ronan stepped forward. "You want to prove I'm a fraud? Fine. Let's prove it, publicly." He pulled off his coat, then his shirt, baring his chest and arms to the cold air. The binding marks were visible immediately, intricate patterns that glowed faintly, spreading across his skin like living tattoos. They pulsed with each heartbeat, unmistakably magical and unmistakably real. Alara did the same, revealing identical marks on her own skin. The connection between them was visible now, threads of light that linked their patterns, showing how they shared the binding's weight. The assembled army gasped, murmured. Several men dropped to their knees. "This is the pact," Ronan said, his voice carrying across the field. "The sacrifice your previous kings made to protect this land. I'm bound to it. My wife is bound to it. Our son will be bound to it when he's old enough to choose. We carry this weight so the kingdom stays strong. That's not death. That's not fraud. That's service. Castellan was shaking now. Lies, all lies. The pact doesn't work like that. How would you know? You've never carried it. Never sacrificed anything more than your integrity for personal gain. Alara addressed the army directly now. Lord Castellan told you the king was dead because it was convenient, because a dead king can't contradict his lies or hold him accountable for his crimes. He needed you to believe I was incompetent so he could take power through you. But look at us. Really look. Do we seem like frauds to you? Silence. The kind of silence that meant minds were changing, loyalties shifting. Anyone who still wants to fight, Ronan said, you're welcome to try. But know that you'll be fighting for a man who lied about your king's death and tried to stage a coup. Is that really the side you want to be on? More silence. Then someone in the back, a soldier wearing Castellan's colors, stepped forward. I signed up to liberate the kingdom from dark magic, he said, not to help a lord settle personal grudges. If the king is truly alive and willing to serve the pact, that's good enough for me. Others echoed him, first a few, then dozens, then hundreds. Within minutes, half of Castellan's army had laid down their weapons and were kneeling to Ronan and Alara. Castellan looked around at his crumbling support, face twisting. No, you fools, can't you see what they're doing? They're telling the truth, one of his own captains said, removing his sword belt and setting it on the ground, something you stopped doing months ago. I'm done, my lord, we all are. The rebellion collapsed in less than an hour. Most of the soldiers surrendered peacefully. A few die-hard loyalists tried to fight and were subdued without serious casualties. Castellan himself was arrested, stripped of weapons and dignity, reduced to just another failed traitor. What do we do with him? Marcus asked. Alara looked at the man who'd tormented her for years, who'd whispered about her inadequacy, questioned her worth, tried to remove her from power when she finally fought back. She could execute him, probably should by traditional standards, make an example that would terrify anyone else considering rebellion. But she was tired of the old ways, tired of cycles of violence and vengeance. Exile, she said. Strip him of everything and send him to the border territories. Let him live out his days as the nobody he's always feared becoming. Your Majesty, that's too merciful. It's exactly merciful enough. He gets to live, but powerless, forgotten, unable to hurt anyone ever again. She turned away from Castellan's shocked face. That's my judgment. Execute it. They returned to the capital victorious, the rebel army having sworn new oaths to the crown. Word spread fast. The queen who'd been called barren had faced down a rebellion and won without spilling blood. The king who'd supposedly died had returned stronger than before. The kingdom started to believe in them. Really believe, not just follow out of tradition or fear, but there was still one piece of business left unfinished. 2 months after the rebellion's collapse, Alara stood in the old catacombs one final time. The chamber where Ronan had been frozen felt different now, cleaned out, the ritual markings scrubbed away, the oppressive weight of ancient magic lifted. Are you sure about this? Ronan asked, standing beside her. Yes. The pact accepted our modification, but it's still tied to this place, to the old ways of doing things. If we're really changing how this kingdom operates, we need to change the foundation too. Breaking the physical anchor could destabilize everything. Or it could free us completely. Let the binding exist without requiring a prison. She looked at the altar where blood had been spilled for generations. I'm tired of sacrifice being the only answer. Let's try something different. They'd prepared carefully for this. Consulted every text they could find about magical anchors and binding points. Gathered materials that supposedly helped transition power from physical locations to living hosts. It was all theory, mostly. But then again, so had been their initial modification of the pact. The ritual took 3 hours. Alara and Ronan working in tandem, speaking words that made their shared binding burn bright, redirecting its connection from stone and shadow to blood and bone. Their son was there too, sleeping peacefully in Marta's arms, his small presence anchoring the third point of their triangle. When it was done, the chamber felt empty. Not dead, but released. The weight that had pressed down on this place for centuries was gone, transferred entirely into the three of them. How do you feel? Ronan asked. Alara tested the binding, feeling it settle more comfortably than before. Lighter, more flexible, like it's actually part of me instead of something imposed. Same. The magic's still there, but it's not fighting us anymore. They sealed the catacombs after that, not with rubble or deception, but with a formal closure, acknowledging what had been sacrificed here while making clear that era was over. The kingdom's protection no longer required hidden chambers and frozen kings. It required people willing to carry the weight together. Time moved forward. Seasons turned. Their son grew from infant to toddler, showing signs of the same fierce determination that had saved them all. The binding's marks appeared on his skin at 2 years old, faint but present, proof that he carried his portion even if he didn't understand it yet. Will it hurt him? Alara asked one night, watching him sleep. No more than it hurts us. Less probably, since we're bearing most of the weight. Ronan brushed dark hair back from their son's forehead. When he's older, we'll explain. Give him the choice we never had. What if he chooses to break free, reject the binding entirely? Then we'll support that choice. Figure out how to redistribute his portion between us. The whole point of this was giving him options, remember? She did remember. Remembered fighting for that principle when everyone said it was impossible. Remembered proving them wrong through sheer, stubborn refusal to accept that sacrifice was inevitable. The kingdom prospered under their joint rule. Not perfectly. There were still disputes, still challenges, still nobles who resented answering to a queen who'd once been dismissed as worthless. But Alara had learned how to handle resistance, had learned that power wasn't about being liked or approved of. It was about making decisions and standing by them even when the court whispered. 5 years after the rebellion, she held court one morning and realized she couldn't remember the last time someone had called her Baron. The whispers had changed. Now they called her the Iron Queen, the one who'd faced down Castellan's army without flinching, the one who'd rewritten the rules of an ancient pact because the old ones didn't serve her needs. She'd take that over their approval any day. Your Majesty, a petitioner said, drawing her attention back. My lord has a dispute with the neighboring territory about water rights. Tell your lord that water belongs to the kingdom, not individual estates. If he wants access, he can apply through the proper channels like everyone else. But your Majesty, tradition is why we had a rebellion 5 years ago. New rules, fair access, no exceptions for nobility. She gestured to the scribe. Make a note. We're codifying water rights by the end of the month. No more disputes about who owns what river. The petitioner bowed and left, clearly unhappy but unable to argue. Alara watched him go and caught Ronan's eye. He was grinning. What? She asked. You, being terrifying. It's attractive. Everything about me is attractive. Try to keep up. He laughed, real and warm and still capable of making her heart skip after all these years. Noted, Your Majesty. That evening, she found him in their son's room, telling stories about the old kings. Their boy was 5 now, bright and curious and asking constant questions about everything. Did great-great-grandfather really bind himself to protect the kingdom? He asked. He did, Ronan confirmed. Though back then it worked differently. One person carried all the weight alone. That sounds lonely. It was. That's why your mother changed it, made it so we carry it together. Can I help carry it too? Ronan exchanged a glance with Alara, who'd been listening from the doorway. You already do, little one. But when you're older, you'll get to decide how much. It's your choice, not ours. What if I choose wrong? There's no wrong choice, just different paths. Your mother and I will support you either way. Their son considered this, then nodded seriously. Okay, but I think I want to help. The kingdom's my home too. Alara felt something crack in her chest. Pride and love and fierce protectiveness all mixed together. This child they'd fought so hard to protect was already thinking about service and sacrifice. Already understanding that power came with responsibilities. She just hoped he'd learn earlier than she had that those responsibilities didn't require destroying yourself. Later, after their son was asleep, Alara and Ronan stood on the tower observatory where he'd spent so many nights alone, searching for solutions that didn't exist. Do you ever regret it? She asked. Everything we went through to get here? The pain, the fighting, The near-death experiences, all the time. He pulled her close. But I don't regret where we ended up. This, us, our son, a kingdom that's actually functional instead of held together by fear and old magic, this was worth it. Even the parts where you were frozen in a catacomb for 3 months, especially those parts, because they led to you storming down there with a knife and a terrible plan that somehow worked. She laughed. It was a great plan. It was insane. But most great plans are. They stood in comfortable silence, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. The binding hummed between them, a constant awareness of each other's presence, proof that they were connected deeper than vows or crowns. I love you, Alara said quietly. I know I've said it before, but I want to say it again, because for 7 years I couldn't, and I'm never taking it for granted. I love you too, more than I have words for. He kissed her temple. Though I'm still sorry about those 7 years, about making you wait and doubt yourself and stop. We've been over this. You were trying to protect me in the only way you knew how. It was misguided and painful and nearly destroyed us both, but your intentions were good. Good intentions don't excuse bad execution. No, but they explain it, and I'd rather understand why you hurt me than hold on to anger about it. He was quiet for a moment, then, you're better than I deserve. Probably, but you're stuck with me anyway. They stayed there until the cold drove them inside, then made their way to chambers they'd shared for 8 years now. The path was familiar, worn smooth by countless nights of this same walk, this same comfortable companionship. Alara thought about the girl she'd been when she first arrived at this keep. Young, hopeful, desperately in love with a man who'd seemed determined to break her heart. She'd spent 7 years trying to be enough for him, trying to earn his attention, trying to convince herself that patience would eventually be rewarded. She'd been wrong about almost all of it. Patience hadn't saved them. Refusing to be patient anymore had. What are you thinking about? Ronan asked, catching her expression. The past. How different everything is now. Better or worse? Different. Not easier. We still have a kingdom to run and a binding to maintain and approximately 10,000 problems at any given time. But we're facing them together instead of alone. That makes all the difference. It does. He opened the door to their chambers. Though I'm curious, if you could go back and tell yourself something from those early years, what would it be? Alara considered this while they got ready for bed. What would she tell that lonely girl pacing her chambers, wondering why her husband wouldn't look at her? I'd tell her that she's not the problem, she said finally. That the distance between them isn't because she's inadequate or unlovable. I'd tell her to stop trying to make herself smaller to fit into spaces that were never designed for her. And I'd tell her that eventually she'll get tired of waiting and do something reckless that changes everything. Would she believe you? Probably not. But maybe it would plant a seed, make her question the narrative she's been fed about her own worthlessness. She climbed into bed beside him. What about you? What would you tell yourself? That fear of hurting her was going to hurt her worse than anything the pact could do. That trying to protect her by pushing her away was just cowardice dressed up as nobility. He pulled her close. And that she was going to save us both despite my best efforts to make that impossible. I didn't save us. We saved each other. Agree to disagree. They fell asleep tangled together, the binding settling over them like a blanket. Somewhere in the keep, their son slept peacefully under Marta's watchful eye. The kingdom sprawled beyond the walls, imperfect and messy, and theirs to protect. Alara dreamed of the future instead of the past, of her son grown tall and strong, making his own choices about the binding, of a kingdom that had learned to value honesty over tradition, of growing old beside a man who'd once been a stranger and was now the other half of her soul. When she woke, morning light was streaming through the windows and Ronan was already awake, watching her with an expression she'd come to recognize, love mixed with wonder, like he still couldn't quite believe she was real. Good morning, he said softly. Morning. She stretched, feeling the binding pulse gently with the motion. What's on the agenda today? Council meeting, trade negotiations, probably at least 3 nobles complaining about the water rights ruling. So a normal day, more or less. He kissed her forehead, though I was thinking we could take the afternoon off, spend time with our son before he decides he's too old to want his parents around. He's 5. We have at least a few more years before that happens. I'm not taking chances. What do you say? What she said was yes, because after years of fighting for every moment of happiness, she'd learned to grab it when offered. The kingdom would survive an afternoon without them. The binding wasn't going anywhere. The problems could wait. But time with the family they'd almost lost? That was precious. Worth protecting. Worth every sacrifice they'd made to get here. They spent that afternoon in the gardens with their son, teaching him about the plants that grew there and telling him stories about the kingdom's history. The version they told was different from the official records, more honest about the mistakes, more clear about the costs of power. Why do you tell me the bad parts? Their son asked. Grandfather's tutor only talks about the victories. Because the bad parts matter, Alara said. They teach us what not to do. Help us avoid the same mistakes our ancestors made. Like the old pact? Exactly like the old pact. It protected the kingdom, but it cost too much. Took too much from the people who carried it. Your father and I changed it because we decided that price was too high. Will I have to change it someday too? Maybe. Or maybe you'll find something even better. That's the thing about ruling. Each generation gets to decide what they keep and what they improve. She ruffled his dark hair. We're not asking you to preserve everything exactly as we left it. We're asking you to make it better. That's a lot of pressure. It is, but you won't be doing it alone. You'll have advisors, allies, people who care about the kingdom as much as you do, and you'll have the binding to help you understand what the land needs. He looked down at his hands, where faint marks were just barely visible. Does it hurt? The binding? Sometimes, Ronan admitted, when the kingdom is under threat or when we push ourselves too hard, but mostly it just feels like awareness, like knowing something's wrong before anyone tells you. And you're okay with carrying it forever? We're okay with carrying it as long as we need to, but forever is a long time. Maybe by the time you're grown, we'll have found a way to transition it entirely to willing volunteers instead of bloodline inheritance. You think that's possible? 3 years ago, I thought binding 3 people instead of 1 was impossible. Then your mother proved me wrong. Ronan smiled. So yes, I think it's possible. We just have to be stubborn enough to make it work. Their son absorbed this, nodding slowly. I want to help. When I'm bigger. We know, and we'll teach you everything we've learned. But for now? Alara stood, brushing dirt from her gown. For now, you're 5 years old and you should be playing instead of worrying about kingdom management. Race you to the fountain? He took off running before she'd finished the sentence, laughing bright and wild. Alara chased after him, Ronan following at a more sedate pace, and for a few perfect minutes they were just a family, instead of rulers bearing the weight of ancient magic. The evening brought them back to reality. Council meetings and reports and all the mundane bureaucracy of running a kingdom. But Alara faced it with renewed energy, the afternoon's reminder of what she was protecting making the tedious parts bearable. The Northern Lords are requesting an audience, Marcus reported. Something about boundary disputes. Schedule them for next week. We'll handle it then. The southern grain shipment is delayed due to flooding. Redirect resources from the eastern reserves. We planned for this. And there's been another request from the Historical Society to study the old catacombs. Alara and Ronan exchanged glances. The catacombs had become something of a curiosity after news spread about the Pact's modification. Scholars wanted to study them. Historians wanted to document them. Everyone wanted access to the place where the old magic had been transformed. Denied, Alara said. That chamber served its purpose. Now it's sealed. If scholars want to understand the Pact, they can study the texts we've already made public. They're going to keep asking. Then I'll keep saying no. Some things are better left in the past instead of picked apart by people who weren't there. The meeting continued for another hour, then finally disbanded. Alara and Ronan retired to their chambers exhausted but satisfied. The kingdom was stable. Their son was thriving. The binding was holding steady. Everything they'd fought for was finally, tentatively, working. Do you think it'll last? Ronan asked as they settled into bed. This peace we've built? Nothing lasts forever, but I think we've given it the best foundation possible. Alara laced her fingers through his, and when challenges come, because they will, we'll face them the same way we've faced everything else. Together. Honestly. without sacrificing pieces of ourselves because someone else decided that's what power costs. You're remarkably optimistic for someone who spent 7 years in a nightmare marriage. I'm realistic. I know we'll have problems. I know the court will keep testing us. I know our son will face challenges we can't even imagine yet. She turned to face him. But I also know that we're stronger than anything that gets thrown at us. We proved that already. Fair point. They drifted off to sleep with the binding humming between them, a constant reminder of what they'd sacrificed and what they'd gained. The magic had asked for everything. They'd given it willingly, then demanded better terms. And somehow, impossibly, they'd won. Years later, when historians would write about this period, they'd call it the Great Transformation, the era when the Northern Kingdom shifted from rule by fear and tradition to rule by cooperation and shared responsibility. They'd write about the barren queen who proved her worth not through producing an heir, but through refusing to accept impossible choices. They'd write about the king who chose love over duty and found a way to honor both. They'd write about the pact that was rewritten by people who understood that sacrifice shouldn't be the default answer to every problem. But Alara didn't care about what historians would say. She cared about the life she'd built, the family that had almost been torn apart and was now unbreakable, the kingdom that had learned to value truth over comfortable lies, the binding that connected her to land and loved ones in ways that felt like belonging instead of imprisonment. She'd started as a discarded wife in a hollow marriage, had become a woman who rewrote the rules when they didn't serve her, had transformed into a queen who understood that real power wasn't about dominance or control. It was about choosing love even when fear seemed safer, about fighting for what mattered even when everyone said it was impossible, about building something better instead of accepting that suffering was inevitable. The court had called her barren, worthless, a failure. They'd been wrong about everything. And Alara, the girl who'd walked cold corridors hoping for scraps of affection, the woman who'd faced down rebellions and ancient magic, the queen who'd rewritten the foundation of her kingdom, she'd proven them wrong in ways they'd never forget. She'd shown them that the most dangerous thing in any kingdom wasn't magic or armies or ancient pacts. It was a woman who'd finally stopped asking permission to exist.